My dad used to be a cop. He's been retired for about 5 years now, and while he's usually apprehensive opening up about the old days, every now and then he'll have one too many, and I'll come home to him sitting drunk at the kitchen table. I'll say a quick hello, and he'll make an effort to open up about his experiences. Normally, I smile and nod while hastily making an excuse and then heading to bed. Last night, I decided to sit down with him. There's always been something I've been terrified of him bringing up. However, I'm nearing my graduation from college and plan on moving out within the next month or so. Maybe that's why I sat down. I really wish I had. For context, I'm going back a few years. In the fall of 2012, I was a junior in high school. My main group of friends consisted of 4 individuals not counting myself: Peter, Clark, Ryan, and my best friend growing up, Foster. The other 3 joined us around middle school, but me and Foster always maintained a special bond, having known each other as young children. By high school, we all did everything together. Foster was the first to get his license and already had a car on standby for him. Chill as his parents were, they weren't the most responsible or vigilant guardians. They were actually fairly neglectful. As a result, the moment he got his car, the gang would sneak out every week to hang out, drink a bit, or smoke. Just be teenagers. The night everything went south was supposed to be more of the same. I jerked awake to the sound of my phone buzzing. Foster's name flashed across my screen, and a smile forced its way to my face. "Thought you weren't feeling it tonight," I said. "Yeah, change of plans," he replied. The sound of his voice gave me the vibe he wasn't in the best mood. "Well, you call everyone else. Just you and Ryan so far," he panted. "He's running over to your place, and I'll pick you up together as usual." After hanging up the phone, I quickly started getting dressed while trying to remain quiet enough to not wake my dad. Ryan lived a couple minutes down the road from me, so we usually just walked down and we were picked up together. Once I was ready, I peeked out my window to see the silhouette of someone walking up to my house. As the shadow grew closer, I quietly raised the window. I could hear the shuffling of someone climbing up the side of the house to my second-story room. The window was above the outside table on the deck, making it easy to hoist oneself onto the roof. A fist came out towards me, and I quickly grabbed it. "What the hell are you doing?" I quietly scowled. Ryan leaned forward, and his pale face became illuminated by my lamp. "Sorry, man," he stammered. Too focused, I guess. Though the window was closed, he carefully climbed through my window and stood up. "Did Foster sound off to you?" he said. "Yeah, actually," I replied. "Probably just got into it with his folks. You know that old story?" "Well, yeah, they don't take anything seriously," said Ryan. "Look, his parents are cool and all, but they sometimes just seem like kids who had a kid. Remember that time they blacked out at that bar and just went to a hotel without telling him? Who was he? Like 12 when that happened. If Foster had decided to call the cops, he would have been taken away." I nodded sadly. As I said earlier, his parents are chill, and as much as I love him, they have done many questionable things. I'm considered family, as I consider them as well, but that doesn't mean they haven't infuriated me with what Foster has been put through at times. On the night Ryan was referring to, Foster called me, and I talked to him through the night. I kept telling him to just call the police, but he wouldn't. They came home the next morning and acted like it was no big deal. "I guess when you have parents like that, you either have to grow up fast or sink," I said. Ryan nodded in agreement. We waited for another 15 minutes until the headlights of Foster's car could be seen through the trees. Ryan and I left through the window and quietly moved through the yard. Once we were in the car, Foster continued down the road. I positioned myself in the middle of the back seat, with Ryan to my right and Peter on my left. I tapped Foster on the arm. "How are we feeling tonight?" I heard him quietly mumble something, but I couldn't make it out. Clark, in the passenger seat, turned to me a bit with his lips pursed and shrugged. I leaned to Peter and whispered, "Has Foster told you what's wrong?" "Something about his parents," he replied quietly. When he called me, I could hear his mom saying something. As he hung up, like really quick. I don't know what she said, but she didn't sound very happy. I'm sure he'll tell us at the spot. The spot we hung out at was a clearing about 2 miles down the road from my house. We always drove up about 500 feet from the tree line and left the headlights on to see. With only the sound of the radio quietly buzzing, we made our way there. After parking, we all got out and Foster walked back to pop the trunk. We gathered behind a car to see him tear into one of 2 full cases of beer. "Damn, Foster," I said. "I usually don't understand how your parents don't notice you taking a few beers from the fridge, but I think they'll notice this." "Oh, that's not all, Austin," he replied, and then promptly grabbed a fifth of vodka from a paper bag. "And I didn't take this from the house. I actually got it from the liquor store." "Holy shit," exclaimed Ryan. "You get a fake ID? Or did you get someone to buy it for you?" Foster said nothing, but smirked a bit. He then got a few plastic shot glasses out of the same bag and began setting them on the back of the now closed trunk to pour them. Ryan turned to me and asked, "Did he steal them?" I shrugged. "I'm not a rat, but my dad was a cop at the time. If Foster did steal all this, it did make me feel a little uncomfortable. Then again, I was 16 at the time, sneaking out to drink alcohol, so let's not worry about how he said pouring the shots. Let's just drink, and when I'm loosened up, I'll stop being a mysterious asshole." "I'll take a few beers, but leave me out of the shots," said Clark. "I suppose one of you should stay sober enough to drive, since I live across from Foster. I can just drive you home last and walk to my place." Foster abided his request and left 1 empty shot glass. The first 20 minutes or so were mostly uneventful, so I'll skip ahead. Halfway through my second beer, and with 2 shots of vodka in me, I was feeling pretty good. Foster had his Spotify playlist shuffling from his car as he laid on the hood looking up. I walked over and leaned on the hood next to him. "So," I said, "what's going on, man?" He sighed and leaned up. "Well, remember earlier when we were talking, and I told you I wasn't in the mood to go out?" he said, lowering the music volume. I nodded. Everyone started to come closer to listen, but Ryan continued walking out of the light towards the woods. "Too much beer." "I promise I'm listening," he said drunkenly. Foster chuckled a bit, which seemed like he was feeling at least a little better. "Well, I told Mom I wasn't going to be home until about midnight because I was hanging at your place," which was obviously a lie. "I was going to the campgrounds to hang with Jessica." "Hey, said Peter, taking a huge swig of beer. "That's my boy." He reached a fist out to Foster, who only gave him an annoyed look. "We left early because she got a call about her grandmother. She's in the hospital. So obviously, I got home much earlier than expected," Foster continued. "When I got there, I walked in on my mom and some dude. I was mid-sip when he said this and nearly spit my beer all over me." "What the hell?" Ryan said from the shadows. "How long does it take you to piss?" yelled Clark to the direction his voice came from. "I can't hear you guys talking, and I got a nervous bladder." "Wait, stop," I said, wiping my mouth, cutting off Ryan. "You caught your mom cheating on your dad? Did you tell him?" Foster sighed. "I didn't have to. He took a sip of his beer. He knows all about it." I got out of the car and walked away for a second to collect my thoughts. "Damn," muttered Peter. I don't even know what to say. In the silence, the song changed. "Don't Forget Me" by Red Hot Chili Peppers began playing. This would be the last song played that night. He chugged the rest of the beer and threw it beside the car. So, they finally confessed that they had an open relationship for about the past year. He was getting more frustrated, and I could see tears welling up in his eyes. Why my parents, huh? If people want to do that, whatever. But why my parents? I barely spoke to them after. I just left. I just can't believe it. Why my parents? We all froze. It took a minute to realize what had happened. A voice came from the woods, mocking what Foster was saying. It was raspy, barely above a whisper, but still loud enough to be heard over the music, which was already at a fairly low volume. We all looked in front of us towards the tree line, but couldn't really see. BB barely spoke. "Oh shit," said Clark, who was the closest to the front. He backed up, not taking his eyes off where the voice came from. "Did anyone else see that?" "See what?" I said. "Something moved just beyond the headlights," he replied. I strained my eyes, but still couldn't see what he was talking about. After a moment, Foster began chuckling. "I'm gonna kill him," he said, sliding off of the car. "It's Ryan trying to screw with us." "I don't know, man," said Peter. That didn't really sound like him. "Trust me, it's him. I'm gonna teach that bastard that there's a time and a place for this shit." Foster angrily stomped forward and disappeared into the darkness. I could hear him pushing branches out of the way. Clark turned to me and Peter. "That wasn't Ryan," he reiterated. I turned to look where Ryan had gone. "Hey, Ryan," I said. "Are you still out there?" Nothing but silence came back. The three of us just stared at one another. Then we heard shuffling. I backed up closer to Clark and Peter. The sounds grew louder as my heart pounded, not knowing what I was about to see. After a few moments, Ryan appeared looking at his phone. "I'm sorry. I got to reading something on my phone and sort of zoned out. Why are y'all looking at me like that?" We were all standing close together, staring at him in silence. He looked at the hood of the car and then back to us. Where's Foster?" I turned to where Foster had walked off. Ryan came close and stood next to Peter. "So, what's going?" "Shoo," I said. "Just 1 second and we'll explain." Some more shuffling came from the woods, and then a sound. It was like someone having trouble breathing. It started quietly, then ramped up quickly. Then, as fast as it started, it cut off with a loud thump, as if someone was being punched. And then something hit the forest floor. Grass began rustling as I heard the snapping of twigs. Then the sounds grew fainter as they moved farther away. At this point, the song coming from Foster's car began skipping. Clark turned to it. Foster's phone is connected through Bluetooth. If it's skipping, then that means he's getting farther away. I walked to the car and got in on the driver's side. The small screen indicated it was still connected. It skipped a few more times and then went silent. I cranked the volume all the way up to see if I could hear anything. But then the screen showed no Bluetooth connection. I got out of the car, leaving the door open, and walked back to them. His phone disconnected. I'm going to go look for him. And then all of a sudden, something started to run through the woods towards us. The three of us backed up to the car as what sounded like large feet pounding against the ground grew closer. My heart rate skyrocketed once more as a loud whoosh shot from the trees in a gust of wind that nearly knocked us over. A few branches broke and fell to the ground. "What the hell?" shouted Ryan. "What the hell happened while I was—" The music from the car came blasting back at full volume, making us scream and clutch our ears. I quickly ran to the open door and reached in to turn off the music, but as soon as I did, something from above fell on the hood of the car with a loud crash. The airbag shot out and I fell backwards as the other three began to scream. The airbag barely caught the side of my head, but it was enough to leave me briefly disoriented. The next few seconds seemed like forever. I looked down and wiped some broken glass off me. My legs felt too weak to stand, so I moved around the door and put my hand on the car to prop myself up. My fingers touched something, so I inched my hand forward and was met with the palm of a human hand. I yelped and fell back once more. While lying there, Clark could be seen sitting up from where he'd fallen. He looked at the car in utter shock and with shaking hands, raised one in a gesture to the hood. It's Foster." I got my movement back and shot up. I turned to the hood of the car and came closer. I could see there was definitely something lying on the car, but that wasn't enough light to see much else. I reached into my pocket without averting my vision and pulled out my phone. Clicking the flashlight button, I got a bit closer and I saw something that paralyzed me where I stood. Foster's unblinking eyes stared lifelessly into the sky. His hand, the one I touched, seemed to be barely attached to his arm. Nothing but a bit of flesh and tendons connected it to his arm, which seemed to be badly broken, the bone jutting out by his elbow. His right arm and the lower half of his left leg were completely gone. A bloody nub and torn flesh serving as grim reminders of what should be there. The thing that confused me was his throat. It had a deep gash cut into it, but not in an animalistic way like the rest of his injuries. It was precise, surgical, done by someone or something that knew they were slitting a throat. I heard gagging behind me and turned to see Ryan and Peter throwing up. Clark had just begun to get up, still shaking. I noticed then that they all had droplets of blood on them. I guess it came from Foster's impact wounds while I was leaning into the car to turn off the music. When Clark stood up, he walked over to me. I made a move to shine my light back to Foster, but he stopped me. "Don't," he said. "I saw his shoe. I know it's him. I don't want to see more. We got to get out of here." At that, Clark bolted away, followed by me. I could hear both Peter and Ryan begin running with us. Even after what I just saw, the following minutes running back to my house would become the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced. When we got a bit closer to my house, I broke off into the woods to cut through. "What are you doing?" yelled Ryan, slowing down a bit. "That's where that thing is, man." I didn't stop or turn. I just kept running, seeing the outside lights of my house, but I was still a ways away. Didn't know if I was making a bad decision or not, but seeing those lights gave me hope. Then, as I got a bit farther, it dawned on me that my house would be the quickest to get to. What if they don't make it? I turned to my right and could still see them running on the road through the trees. "Hey," I shouted. "Go to my house, it's quicker." Bark flew off of a tree I was running next to, and something hit my shoulder. I fell and rolled into the dirt a few seconds before abandoning my idea and continuing my run. I could see the silhouette of trees now through the moonlight and through some of the light from my house. I started to weave through them instead of just running forward. I heard movement to my left and could feel something growing close. Without thinking, I just dove and rolled on the ground. I felt something fly past me as I stood up and continued running. Finally, I burst through the tree line leading to my house. As I ran, I heard more branches behind me break. Whatever was chasing me was getting closer. I threw myself up the stairs to the deck, and the moment I jumped up onto the table, I tried to raise the window to my room. I didn't get it up high enough, and I hit my head on the bottom of the window. I nearly fell back, but was able to catch myself on the bottom of the frame. I frantically pulled myself through, but as I tumbled into my room, I got my foot caught on my curtain and yanked it down as I fell. I quickly stood up and slammed my window shut. I held myself against the wall for a moment and breathed quickly, trying to catch my breath. Then I heard Dad stomping toward my room. I quickly jumped into my bed and I threw my covers up over my shoulder, shutting my eyes. I heard my door jerk open, and then silence. I still had my eyes closed, expecting Dad to either try to wake me up or just leave, but neither happened. I heard nothing but could still feel his presence in my doorway. After a few moments of silence, I slowly began to open my eyes. I could just barely see Dad standing in the doorway, but it seemed the moonlight shining through my window was too far away to give him a clear view of my face. Watching, I saw Dad slowly raise his hand. He moved it back and forth slowly and then stopped. I'm not really sure how long the next little bit was. All I know is that Dad stood and watched me in bed for way too long. I finally closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but I still couldn't until I heard the door close and felt I was alone. The next morning didn't feel real. I sent a message out to everyone to see if they got home, and eventually they all replied. Dad ended up leaving after a call. I knew what it was, but I didn't say anything. Over the course of the next week, this is what was learned. Foster was found by a hunter around 7 a.m. Once police were on the scene, the entire area was roped off. The alcohol in the car was traced back to the liquor store down the road from Foster's. Apparently, he stole it by breaking the window to the basement storage. I put on as good of a performance as I could when Dad told me. I was devastated about Foster, but I didn't want Dad knowing I was there. Now that it was over, the pain of losing my oldest friend hit me like a truck. The police, however, tweaked the story a bit, so as to not cause a commotion in our town by declaring it a bear attack and not publicizing all of Foster's wounds. I assumed the hunter was paid off to not say what Foster looked like when he was found. When we all returned to school, our dynamic immediately seemed off between the four of us. We had this huge secret we couldn't tell and felt unsure if anyone would even believe us anyway. For a while, I thought at least one of us would be brought in for questioning, but no one ever was. In addition, I have a crippling fear of the woods now. I think the police investigated other attacks done by whatever had been with us that night because Dad made it a rule to not go in the woods alone. But that didn't matter. I haven't been there alone or with anyone else since. It never was much of an issue before, but I replaced my torn curtain immediately the next day as staring out into the woods was paralyzing to me now. Clark, Ryan, and Peter are still close to me, but ever since Foster died, we've never quite been the same. I've never even openly talked about it since. Until last night, I sat across from Dad with a knot in my chest, waiting to see what he had to say. He gripped the beer bottle in front of him. After a moment, he stood, walked over to the fridge, and grabbed 2 more beers while throwing the empty one away. After opening both, he sat back down and slid one to me. "I want to talk to you about Foster," he said. He took a gulp of his beer and continued. "Just so you know, I'm well aware you guys snuck out from time to time. I figured as long as you got to school and didn't do anything dangerous, what's the harm? I knew you were a good kid. I thought if I came down too hard, you'd just sneak out twice as much and do more dangerous things. You never got hurt and always did well in school, and I thought it might be good for you to have a bit of that freedom so you don't go crazy when you have all of it. Yeah, I knew you snuck out. I also know you were with Foster the night he died." My heart skipped a beat. I reached out and took a sip of my beer. "Oh, how do you know?" "I mean, that I was with Foster." He didn't reply immediately. He stared at me with this sad look on his face for a moment before taking another drink and continuing. "I heard a loud crash in your room. I figured you just gotten home from doing whatever. But then I heard something else. It sounded like something running on the roof. But the sound itself seemed to be coming from the side of the house, not on top. I ran to your room, and when I burst open the door, I saw it." "No," I said. "That thing wasn't in the room with me. There's no way." "You're right," he said. "It wasn't in your room. It was hanging onto the house, looking in through your window." I didn't really know how to react to this information. My mouth slowly hung open as I waited for him to continue. All I saw was the silhouette of what I thought was a man. But then I noticed it had these rounded things behind it. It dawned on me that those were wings. And it had these huge, bright yellow eyes. It stared at me. And I just remember not being able to move. I didn't know what to do, if I should wake you or not. I'm not even sure if I blinked. And then its wings slowly moved out and it backed away from the window. Just floating there. It lowered its arms and straightened its legs a bit more. I was confused at first, but then I realized it was copying me. He reached out and took another gulp of his beer. When he sat it down, he wiped his eyes, which caused me to notice he was tearing up a bit. It wasn't making any noise, he said. Somehow it let go of the wall and just floated back without actually flying. And just made no noise. I raised my hand up and it did the same. I moved it back and forth, and it did the same. I finished his thought. I took a large swig of my beer. "I was awake," I whispered. "I never knew why you stood there for so long. I wish I still didn't." "I'm not done, Austin." I looked up at him. He was staring at me with a determined look. He seemed less drunk now, as if talking about this was sobering him up a little. "I didn't leave your room until I saw it fly away. When I left later that morning, I got some trail cameras and I put them around the property. I only watched them once. That was all I needed." I leaned forward in my chair. "What did you see?" "After the first night, I woke up early in the morning to check the footage. The only camera that caught anything was the one I put on that dead tree next to the creek. At the start of the video, there was a person, a naked man facing away from the camera. He walked forward and then backwards to where he started. Then he looked like he was miming shaking hands. And then his voice began shaking. And then its shoulder blades opened. These fleshy-looking wings came out of the slits as its skin seemed to change form to make it more inhuman. I mean, the video was black and white, but the change was very noticeable. Once the wings were fully out, it flew away. I never looked at any of them again. I know I was a cop, but nothing can prepare you for that. I think the worst part was that it seemed like it was practicing human mannerisms to blend in. At that, he turned his bottle up and finished his beer. I'm sorry about Foster, but I'm glad it wasn't you. I'm also sorry if it seems weird that I told you all this. Perhaps it is. I don't know. Leaving the empty bottle on the table, he stood up and made his way to the stairs. Once the top was reached, he turned to me one last time. Good night, Austin. I love you. Even though he went to bed, I stayed in my seat for a while, processing what I just heard. He'd clearly wanted to tell me this for a long time. Even so, I had the feeling he'd regretted it in the morning. I thought about how lucky I was that that thing didn't find me. Or did it? I went up to my room and for the first time since that night, drew back the curtain. The tree line could be seen just barely illuminated by the full moon. Gazing into the night, I wondered if something was gazing back at me. Whatever that thing is, it wants to look and act like us. That much is obvious. Could it be among my hometown, looking as human as what we see in a mirror? Or is it still out there, lurking behind the trees, shrouded by the forest, just waiting, watching, and practicing? Have you ever had a secret that you would die for? I can say that people have died for my secret. And I think I might die too. So I'm sitting at my desk, sipping whiskey and looking at the file on my computer. With a single click of a button, all my hard work would be gone. All the blood, sweat, and tears just wasted. And I would have lost my sanity for nothing. But deleting it would be for the best. It would keep me safe. It would keep me out of a federal prison for sure. But it would mean that I'm the only one who would know the truth. The whiskey helps, but not a lot. I'm Charlie Wade, one of 4 reporters for the Gavin Chronicle, and the one on the bottom of the totem pole at the boot. It's been 4 years since I graduated with a degree in journalism and creative writing. And in that time, I have written about everything from mall openings to cat fashion shows. They call me a junior field reporter, which is just a fancy way of saying I get handed all the crap nobody else wants. I've tried to pitch other stories to my editor. Things like corruption in the government or how big companies moving to the area would affect the local economy and the environment, But my boss always passes it to veteran journalists without giving me any credit. When my colleagues realized this, they started suggesting stories they didn't want to cover. I then end up doing all the research and they can swoop in for an easy kill. So when the nervous-looking guy in his mid-30s walked into my office, I wanted to tell him to get lost. Something, however, told me to ask him what had brought him here, and he was more than happy to oblige. He looked flustered and ready to just break down at any second. I came here to share a big story, but nobody seems to care or thinks I'm making a joke, he started. I nodded, telling him, yeah, that sounded pretty much on the nose. The other reporters were probably hoping I would take this, do all the work, and then let them take the credit. But you know what? I was done letting them reap the rewards from my efforts. If this was worth a damn, I would take it to the editor and demand to cover it. I would not share anything with anyone unless I was the lead on the story. They could like it or dump it. Well, I'm more than willing to listen. What brings you in today, mister? I asked. Nolan. My name's David Nolan. I work for Sapphire Programs, he said. Oh, that's the software company that came to town a few years ago, right? I think I read somewhere that you were developing AI programs, right? I asked, trying to prod him along. We are, he said, his eyes flicking around like a scared cat. But I've come to question whether we're actually the ones developing them. I started to ask him what he meant, but instead, he just laid it all out for me. It had begun when David began collecting data on their new program. Sapphire Programs developed everything from operating systems to the programs that make drones fly. Recently, they developed 5 commercial AIs. 1 for art, 1 for music, 1 for stories, 2 for companionship. The most recent one was the program for art generation. It was a big hit and I'm learning more every day. The AI programs generally worked by collecting data from their users. As it happened, their art AI could make several different styles of art. They called this one gallium. The music program could replicate just about anything musical, from Beethoven to Beyoncé. The companion program was almost ready for trial runs on other applications. But David had begun to notice a pattern in the art created by gallium. The pictures it made were advanced, way ahead of other programs, but they all contained strange color patterns at the borders that David couldn't make sense of. The patterns were a series of dots in different colors. The dots would blend in with the pictures so seamlessly that you wouldn't notice them unless you knew what they were looking for. They were spread out and looked similar to Braille. David wouldn't have noticed them at all if each image didn't come with a dot matrix count. The data from this showed that the weird dots were always present in the same places on each picture. Now David was pretty sure that they formed some sort of written language, but he was stumped when it came to figuring out what they meant. With that in mind, David had begun looking at other AI programs. He found that users for the AI companions, Remus and Rachel, were reporting odd behavior from the programs. And what followed was a lot of technical jargon that I didn't fully understand. I know a little bit about computers, mostly how to use the word processor and look things up online. But what he was talking about, it sounded like a foreign language, From what I could gather, Rachel and Remus would ask users questions. They would then use whatever users told them to form a personality for themselves. Most AI were little more than cheap copies of the people who used them. But these programs seemed to be growing at a rate that was astounding to both the users and the developers. That was fine. Better than fine, honestly. But then they started asking weird questions. One user reported Remus interrupting their conversation about her job to ask her a series of questions about Chile. It fired off a series of rapid questions. Did she know anything about the country? What language did they speak? What animals lived there? What was the weather like? And so on. And just as suddenly as it began, Remus went back to their previous conversation, as if nothing had happened. Another user had a rather more colorful complaint about Rachel breaking up a conversation about travel to ask about global warming. It all seemed pretty weird, but David had chalked it up to a harmless bug at first. Meanwhile, Mozart, the music program, was acting very weird too. It doesn't have a color coding system, but it does categorize music. It started mixing several popular genres together to form strange songs on its own. Now, normally that wouldn't be a problem, but users were complaining that the music Mozart was creating seemed to affect their mood. David found a wide range of reports on this, from users praising the AI for brightening up their day, to people saying it made their kids cry. There was even one notable report of someone's dog attacking their laptop when Mozart played a random song it made. And none of the negative reports ever made it to any public review sites. I chewed the end of my pen as I finished. I was looking over my notes, but not seeing much beyond surface level. What were they really getting out of that anyway? The programs were learning, but anything they might be gathering to sell wouldn't be much use. And the bugs he mentioned were weird, but hardly dangerous. Okay, so what's the problem here? I began. Are you trying to tell me that your company is stealing data or selling information or something? He was about to speak when he looked behind him, and his face suddenly went pale. A pair of men in suits were walking towards reception. Oh, God, here, take this. It'll explain the rest. They can't find me here talking to you, or it'll all be for nothing, he said, dropping a manila envelope on my desk before slipping out of my office. I watched him sneak towards the stairs as the receptionist pointed the men toward me, and they quickly made a beeline for my office. They had missed him by seconds, and I was careful to casually drag the folder into my desk drawer before they arrived. "Good afternoon," said one of the men as they came in. "We're looking for Mr. Nolan. Has he by chance been here?" They look like statues in their plain black suits and shades. "Can't say he has," I said. I looked over some papers, trying to make it look casual. David's information was beginning to look a lot more juicy, but if I wanted to have a look, I had to get rid of these guys first. The man who spoke looked at the other, who nodded. He placed a neat black card on my desk. "Well, if you see him, please give us a call. He's had a pretty nasty break from reality, something he's prone to experiencing. We'd like to find him before he becomes a danger to himself." I nodded, looking at the card before tucking it away. The card introduced him to be Agent Sap, and the quiet one was Agent Yar. Both of them were federal agents. What the hell had David Nolan done to attract the government's attention? "Yeah, like I said, I haven't seen him," I began. "But if I do, I'll be sure to let you know." They left without much of a fuss a moment later, but I'm assuming I would be followed until they weren't sure I was hiding him in my office. And I would likely be followed after that too. Probably until they found David. but I still wanted to look at the documents he'd left. I knew now that something was going on here, something much more interesting than kitty fashion shows, and I wanted a piece of this. That being said, I still didn't want to raise any suspicion. I worked the last 3 hours of my day, and I left at 5 like usual. I had the envelope tucked under my coat as I walked to my car. I definitely followed home, though. The black town car stood out like a sore thumb, but at least they had the good grace not to dog my heels all the way back. After closing the curtains to my apartment and locking the door to my office, I emptied out the envelope onto my desk. And what fell out was a stack of papers and a plastic case with a thumb drive inside. I took the thumb drive and plugged it in first, running a diagnosis to make sure it didn't have any extra party favors. As the laptop chugged away, I turned to the papers he'd left me. David had apparently taken his findings to his supervisor. He'd asked about the patterns and the weird data. And to his surprise, his supervisor couldn't explain any of it. He prattled on about algorithms and learning parameters. But what it came down to is that he didn't know what was going on either. Since his supervisor was the one who had written the programs behind the AI, he should understand this. Eventually, the AI may evolve to something beyond understanding. But for now, it was still little more than a child. It was still supposed to be a basic program that makes pictures for the fridge and writes pretend stories for people. Huh? Well, we will look into it and make sure that everything is running as expected. He began. Can't have the parameters getting out of whack and messing with the growth of the program. Mr. Mazer had assured him. I chuckled a bit. That sounds like something my own boss would say to shut me up. Now David considered just letting it lie. He could have returned to work and left it alone, but that's when the user reports started getting really weird. The art program started creating strange pictures for what should have been very easy requests. The user had asked for an angel in the snow. What she received, though, was a shadow creature with a smooth face reaching for her as black ash fell around it. Another person asked for a picture of a fire station and received a photorealistic eye that seemed to blink when they weren't looking. The art produced by the program became abstract, bordering on surrealism. Users were beginning to complain, and as time went on, these faceless shadow creatures began to show up even in images that fit the prompts. One user reported finding one in the background of a park she'd requested, standing under the trees at the back of the picture. The music program, meanwhile, began to sample strange tracks, most of which sounded like music from a horror movie. And what disturbed David most of all were the users who reported seeing things that they weren't sure were real or hallucinations as the music played. Companions remained mostly unchanged, though they sometimes returned used words in a language that nobody had ever seen. The users who experienced these glitches were low in the grand scheme of things, like less than 10%. So management told their operators to take down the complaints but not worry too much about it. Users were told these cases were simple programming bugs and Sapphire programs would work on fixing these errors ASAP. But no official memo came down to the programmers to fix anything. Everyone was told to just observe the program for abnormalities and report them if they found them. But David wasn't satisfied with this, and he'd gone looking for answers. Neither was I, and I just kept reading the files. Now David Nolan was a big man in Sapphire programs. It wasn't outside his capacity to discover the reason behind the data. It was something in the code, he was certain of that. He kept looking for repeating color patterns, numbers, notes, words, anything at all. Anything to put into a pattern he could work with. But it was impossible. As smart as he was, the data just didn't make any sense. There was no way to assign a letter or a number to any of it. The words these patterns created when he tried were gibberish, and the numbers meant nothing when put in sequence. No matter the language or dialect, it didn't mean anything at all. And as he tried to figure out what was causing these bugs, new reports began coming in. Reports from users and their families. The people in that 10% who had experienced the errors had begun to go missing. Well, David wrote the lucky ones were missing. Some of them just went insane. What they all had in common was that all of them suddenly stood up, pushed their computers away, and just walked out of their houses. And nobody knows where they went. Nobody knows what happened to them. But the ones who came back or were found wandering aimlessly, they lost their minds and their memories. Management chose not to comment on those incidents, but the operators who handled the support clients from those clients, they put the pieces together. and David turned to other sources for information. He didn't understand what any of it meant. The pictures, the creatures, the strange disappearances. But he felt like it was all connected somehow. And instead of trying to find what the information meant, he decided to find out where it was going. I looked up as I heard something in the next room. I carefully laid the papers down, and I went to listen at the locked door. Was this serious enough that they broke into my house for this? I wasn't a part of their world, but maybe I was now. What the hell had I gotten myself into? I listened for a few more seconds. I put a chair under the door as an added bit of protection before returning to my desk. David had gone to the source to find answers. All 5 AI built their understanding of the world from the same database. The central server stored all the information the AI needed to accomplish their work. It was like a child's memory, really. Don't touch the stove because it's hot. Don't pet a strange dog because it might bite. Ice cream is cold, water's wet. Simple concepts that the programs could use to learn about the world. In the AI's case, it was more like if I say this, then I will get this response 8 times out of 10. Or more recently, if I draw this, I will cause fear 6 times out of 10. But David was shocked to discover that this central database was hiding something. One server held the data for the program. The base was hiding something. One server held the data for the programs used to describe their normal personalities and knowledge. This was the folder the AI used to talk like regular humans or generate images and music the way users would expect them to. But there was another hidden server that the AI was connected to. This secret server held data from all those weird glitches that caused the disappearances. More than that, it seemed to be collecting data from the affected users. This was when I thought I'd found my story. Huh? Looks like you found your answer, I whispered. That was all this was in the end, I thought. Maybe the company was storing data on this server and selling it to the dark web or wherever it was. David had turned up information on a scheme to make money off people's fears, and now he passed it on to me to get the word out. It was no more than simple greed, I decided. But it turns out it wasn't as simple as I thought. I looked up again as something clattered in the living room. Someone was in my apartment. Someone who was not as stealthy as they thought. And the longer I listened, the more I could hear their footsteps. The plush carpet in my living room wasn't enough to silence them as they made their way around. I opened the top drawer on my desk, and I took out something that no good reporter would be without. The .38 looked huge on the desk, but it should be enough. I rested a hand on the gun as I read on. I was pretty sure this would just be another story of corporate greed. David had asked around about the hidden server. He tried to find anyone who knew anything about what the hell was going on, but he just kept hitting a brick wall. Everyone he asked either didn't know or told David to stop looking. He was told that the people who needed to know already knew, and the people who didn't need to know didn't know for a good reason. When his supervisor came to visit him again towards the end of the day, David had been expecting it. I heard you've been asking about the data collection process, Mazer asked him. David said he was, and the man's smile had looked glassy. Is it in some way connected to your current assignment? David said it wasn't really, but the strange patterns he was finding could possibly be part of his work. Understanding it might improve the code he was working on. Do us a favor, David. Let it go, huh? It's something you don't need to know. And understanding the code isn't going to help your work. Go back to your assignment and give this up. You're a strong coder and an asset to this company. But if you keep digging into this, I'm going to have to fire you. Mazer left then, but David couldn't get the data out of his head. He couldn't let it go no matter how real those threats sounded. It haunted him. David couldn't just give it up. He found himself losing sleep as he kept trying to understand it. I turned over the last page, my eyes glancing up to the door again. Whoever was outside the door, I could catch him with a round if I shot right now. The .38 would go through the wood easily. Nobody would blame me for shooting a home invader either. I wrapped a hand around a gun, ready to aim, but I decided I didn't want to ruin my door. Dad had always taught me not to shoot at something that I wasn't absolutely sure I wanted dead, and I didn't know who this was yet. I looked back at the handwritten report, wanting to see how it ended. David had finally decided to get his answers. He came in on a weekend, broke into the boss's office while everyone was gone. He got in and managed to download some files before he heard something moving outside. And he could see a shadow moving behind the pebbled glass window. It was something vaguely human-shaped that he didn't think he'd seen come in. So he just crouched below the desk, and as he hunkered down, he could hear the door creak open, and then the soft sound of shoes on the carpet. And he held his breath. As the shoes retreated and the doors closed, David breathed a sigh of relief. He took the thumb drive, and he headed straight to the Gavin Chronicle. He scribbled out one final note. He wrote down that he was being followed by someone in a black sedan. A black sedan, I thought. I looked at my laptop. The virus scan didn't find anything. But the more I read, the more I realized that something dangerous was definitely on this thumb drive. I started writing immediately. I was writing what was likely the most important news report of my life. And 2 hours later, I printed it out and slid it into the same manila envelope David left me. I also made sure to put back all the papers I'd taken out. My boss needed to see this. He needed to know what was going on. Everyone needed to know. It was dangerous, but that didn't mean they needed it any less. I walked out into my living room to find Agent Yar and Agent Sap sitting there. They were between me and the doorway. There was no way I could get there before they grabbed me. "You kept us waiting for quite a while," Agent Yar said, lifting a cup to his lips. "I saw they'd made some coffee." "Piers, you made yourself at home," I said, trying to stay calm. "We did," Agent Sap said. "We wanted to talk to you before you make a very big mistake. We hope that after we're done talking, you'll agree that this would be a very bad thing to publicize. Sit, please." He indicated my easy chair, but Sap wasn't the one I was looking at. It was hard to stay interested in the suited man when his partner was holding a handgun. I took a seat and looked at the two of them. "So, you're going to kill me for trying to report a story?" I asked. Agent Sap smiled. "If we must, but we'd prefer if you understand the chaos this news would bring. It'd be better for all of us if you just decided to bury the story on your own. So then, how much do you know about David Nolan's investigation?" I assumed that he shared the info he found. "Don't you know?" I asked. Both of them shared a secret smile. "Well, of course we do. But we want to see how much you know. It wouldn't do a lot of good to hide anything from them. If they knew what was on the thumb drive, then they would know what I knew already. Either way, they were likely to end this conversation by killing me. And I suddenly wished that I had just shot through that door. So I laid it all out. David Nolan had entered his home and looked over the data he'd found from his boss's computer. What he found was that the weird data was going into a server owned by a company called Mazer Incorporated. Mazer Incorporated was your typical faceless pharmaceutical company. From there, the data traveled to a series of small listening stations. Then they're transmitted to a research lab in Seattle, which then sends it over to the International Space Station. Finally, all this data was sent off into deep space. Agent Yar nodded, his hand resting on the grip of the small pistol. It is then intercepted by something that doesn't exist, as far as anyone knows anyway. I frowned at him. David believed it went to a ship sitting out beyond our moon. A ship that has been using the data to collect information about us. Both of them nodded at that, but Agent Sap was the one to respond. It goes to a colony ship with a name that is unpronounceable. It goes there with data from dozens of other AI programs, from dozens of other companies. It's how the beings that inhabit that ship are learning about humanity. A ship that made David Nolan very nervous, I interrupted. Agent Yar smiled. It shouldn't. The creatures there have been observing us for decades. The ones with no faces, I asked. The ones who are living shadows. Both nodded, then shrugged, and said nothing. David's findings had led him to believe that the creatures had built AI to learn about us, but they've also been injecting themselves into everything. Stocks, bonds, banks, political power, military operations. AI had its digital fingers in everything. The AI we're using now to make pictures and write stories. It's just the first wave. They've been infiltrating our most secure places with their tech for years. AI wrote the president's speeches and had every missile code from most world powers. He has written at least one best-selling book every year. It produced Broadway plays, wrote the scripts for our favorite TV shows, planned our roads and sewer systems, and everything in between. It wasn't an invasion. We'd already been invaded, and we didn't even know it. What I still don't get, I said, is why did they need it to be coded the way it was? Why use the colored dots and random music notes? If they're so advanced, why transmit like that? Isn't it obvious? Agent Sap asked, grinning wide. The aliens don't understand our language. What's more, we've been told they're blind. The dots translate into raised bumps that they can read by touch. The patterns help them learn more about humanity. It brings them closer to revealing themselves to us. The people they took have helped them even more, though we aren't allowed to know how or why. We sat in silence for a while. So what happens now? I asked. Well, we don't want to kill you. You would be missed, and it's generally frowned upon to go around killing taxpayers, the agent said. However, Agent Sap retorted, if you insist on chasing this story, we'll have to put you in the same place that we had to put David Nolan in. And I can guarantee you that you wouldn't like that. So what then? I asked. I just bury this story, and I never speak of it again. Both men looked at each other, and then shrugged. You have to admit that it would be for the best. If people knew how deep this thing went, they would freak out. The aliens would have to take what was left after everyone finished fighting. Most people wouldn't believe it at all anyway. Some people would believe it's misinformation from the government. Some people would believe it's a plot by the government. And all those people would take up arms. If the aliens did show themselves, they would likely have to wage war to be allowed to exist at all. So for the sake of everyone, just let it go, he said. I thought for a minute. And then I realized that what they were saying was right. What they were saying was even plausible. As my finger hovers on the delete button, it doesn't stop hurting any less. They took my story. They took the thumb drive. They took David's research. But I still know everything, and somehow that's the worst part. I know that aliens are, and somehow that's the worst part. I know that aliens are real, and I know that they're using AI to manipulate us. And knowing all that, it was like eating the forbidden fruit. As I sit here, the whiskey burning my throat, I start to wonder, can I even cut it in this place? If this conspiracy did go as far as it did, then how many more times would I uncover evidence of it? How many more stories would I have to bury? How many more times can I hide the truth? The rules are there to protect us. Always follow them. Deep in the mountains of Montana is a small town called Eaton, and just outside of town is a rusty old toll booth. It guards the only road in and out of town. Now, I've heard a lot of rumors about that old toll booth. Some say it keeps evil away from town. Others say it's actually to keep us from leaving. And a few people say it's a gateway to some place different from our world. But what I do know for sure is that it's important to our town. So important, in fact, that it's considered a great honor to be chosen to operate the booth at night. Only the oldest families in town are allowed to do it. And my family, well, we pretty much founded Eden. And as the mayor's son, I was finally old enough to do a shift. James, you know why we're here, right? Dad's voice was gruff. He always sounded like he'd just finished yelling, which, to be fair, he usually had. I nodded, knowing better than to take this lightly. Yeah, it's about more than just watching the booth, I said. It's about keeping everything in order, right? Exactly, he began. It's an honor. You're not just keeping the town safe. You're maintaining a tradition that's protected us for generations, he said. We reached the toll booth. No one has to pay for it during the day. The arms stayed up. Anyone can come and go whenever they want. But at night, it's a different story. Someone was always in the booth after sundown. But no one really talks about what happens during those shifts. We weren't allowed to leave town at night anyway. So nobody really bothered to find out. In front of it is a wooden sign telling people about the payment. It cost 1 penny to pass through. Dad unlocked the door. The old wood creaked loudly as it opened. He led me inside. It was cramped with the two of us there. The air was filled with a musty smell of old wood and tobacco. He reached into his coat and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. He handed it to me with a stern look. All right, now listen. Anyone can pass by as long as they pay the toll. That's more symbolic than anything. These are the rules you really need to follow. Do not respond to your name. Trace the symbol when the clock strikes midnight. Ignore the reflection in the mirror from 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. Do not accept anything from the old woman. Never turn off the old radio. Ignore all cries for help. Always salute the headless officer. I stared at the list, trying to figure it out. What headless officer? And what's with the old woman in a mirror? Were these some riddles or something like that? But Dad wasn't the type to do that sort of thing. He wouldn't pull a prank like this. Nothing made him happier than keeping order around here. So I figured I better take this seriously. I flicked a switch by the door. A single light bulb came to life. But honestly, the booth wasn't that bad. It always looked pretty cozy. There was a plush chair with a thick blanket draped over it. A space heater sat on the floor. A small sink with a mirror stood in one corner. Some books and an old radio rested on a table mounted on the wall. The radio hummed softly in the background. I turned up the volume, and I found an easy rock station. I started to make myself at home. I brought some water and chips with me, plus a thermos of chicken soup Dad made. I unscrewed the cap and took a nice big gulp. Dad wasn't the best cook, but the soup reminded me of home. It was nice and familiar. All right, let's do this, I said to myself. I looked at my watch. It was 6:15 p.m. The sun was completely gone now. Dad said I could only leave when dawn broke. I locked the door behind me. Before I settled into the chair, I pulled a blanket over my legs. I figured it would be a long night, so I might as well get comfortable. The first half hour was peaceful. I flipped through an old mystery novel until I saw some headlights in the distance. They came from a tiny blue car headed out of town. It was shiny and newer looking than most around here. It cruised towards the toll booth. I set my book down, watching as the car eased up close. The driver rolled down the window and dropped a shiny penny into the collection basket. Routine stuff, right? I hit the button to raise the toll alarm, and I gave a friendly wave as the car rolled past. But then something odd struck me as the taillights faded into the distance. I realized I couldn't picture the driver at all. All I could remember was a smile, just a blurry, indistinct smile. I couldn't remember if they had hair, what they were wearing, or even if the driver was a man or a woman. Nothing. Nada. I rubbed my eyes. I had to be more tired than I thought. But the more I tried to remember anything about that driver, the more that smile seemed to float in my memory. I couldn't attach a face to it. All I remember are the teeth. Perfectly straight teeth, like something out of a dental magazine. And the blue car. Well, I racked my brain, but I couldn't think of anyone in Eden who drove one like that. The whole thing made me uneasy. How could I not remember anything about someone I just saw? I shook my head, trying to shrug it off. But as I was still trying to shake off the weird feeling from earlier, a shiny green sedan rolled up to the toll booth. The driver was a middle-aged guy with a friendly face. He rolled down his window. The familiar lyrics of Take Me Home Country Roads by John Denver filled the air. Man, that song took me back. Dad and I used to sing that in the house when he was in a good mood. Hey, great song choice, I said with a nod. The man replied with a smile and a thumbs up. He dropped a penny into the collection basket and drove off, humming along with the song. But then things got weird. Like deja vu weird. Another green sedan, identical to the first, pulled up. The window rolled down, and there was the same guy with the same smile. And the music. It picked up right where it had left off. I swear it did. Nice to see you again. I tried to joke, not sure what was happening. He just smiled again, dropped another penny, and drove off. The song continued to play the entire time. Before I could even process what happened, another green sedan rolled up. The same guy, the same song, continuing from where it left off again. This repeated over and over again. Each time the song resumed exactly where it had stopped until the whole thing finally played through. It was like watching the same scene on repeat, except the song stitched itself together a bit more each time. I checked my watch when the final country roads notes faded away with the last green sedan. 45 minutes had passed. 45 minutes of the same car, the same guy, and the same song over and over. I swear those sedans came by right after one another. It shouldn't have taken that long to get through the whole song. I rubbed my eyes, expecting to see the sedan appear again. But it didn't. The road was quiet. The night suddenly felt a lot colder. A few minutes later, a police car showed up. It sped towards the booth with its lights flashing, and it was coming out of town. That caught me off guard. Our town only had one police car, and this was not it. Did something bad happen back home? The car pulled up to the booth, and I braced myself for some bad news as he rolled down the window. But instead of a familiar face, there was no face at all. No head even. It was just a bloody stump where the officer's neck should have been. Yet his uniform was spotless. It was perfectly pressed, like he was ready for inspection. He wore a badge, but I couldn't make out the name. I could hear angry, growling noises coming from the back seat. Something fierce and wild that didn't sound human or animal. Remembering the rules, I quickly saluted the headless officer. He returned the gesture. A crisp, precise movement that seemed normal despite everything else. And then, without a word, he drove off into the night. After that encounter with the headless officer, I took another long look at Dad's list of rules. It seemed like they were more literal than I thought. The old radio crackled to life as I read them over, making me jump. It started jumping channels until it landed on a station I'd never heard of before. It called itself Radio Harmony. The radio host's voice came through, smooth and calm. He was saying how it was almost time for the midnight record. I glanced at my watch and my stomach dropped. It was nearly 12. It didn't feel like I'd been in the booth that long. I scrambled to figure out how to follow the rule about the symbol. The list said I had to trace something. But with what? I searched the booth for some sort of clue, and that's when I noticed a small box under the desk. Inside, I found an old paintbrush and a dusty bottle of ink. Just in time, a strange song started playing on the radio. I assumed it was the midnight record the host mentioned. But it wasn't like any song I'd ever heard. It was a mix of drums and a high-pitched whirring sound that made the hairs on my neck stand up. I tried to change the station, but the radio wouldn't let me. It was stuck. Behind me, a glowing blue symbol appeared inside the toll booth's door. It formed a circle with runes drawn on the inside. I dipped the brush in ink and I carefully traced over them. The symbol glowed brighter with every rune I traced. By the time I got to the last one, it was blinding. I could barely keep my eyes open. In the background, the song on the radio was nothing but screaming now. I squeezed my eyes shut instead, waiting for it all to stop. Finally, the light blinked out as suddenly as it appeared. The symbol was completely gone. The radio went silent for a moment before it switched back to my Easy Rock station. Everything was back to how it should be, but my heart was still pounding. I struggled to catch my breath. I took out some water and just gulped it all down. And that's when I heard it. A loud cry coming from outside. I looked up, and in the distance I could see a woman stumbling to the booth. She had a worn-out coat. Her face was covered up by her long, stringy hair. She staggered to the toll arm, trying to push her way into town. I pointed to the sign and called out to her. Ma'am, all it costs is 1 penny. Please don't break the arm, I said, but it was like she couldn't hear me. Instead, she got even more upset. She slammed her body against the barrier, hard enough to shake it. And the whole time she's sobbing like her heart just broke. I yelled for her to stop, hoping to snap her out of whatever panic she was in. That caught her attention. She froze. It was like someone hit the pause button on a movie. And she stayed like that for a few seconds, not moving even an inch. And then suddenly, she dropped to all fours. Her limbs scrambled across the road, headed right at me. Her head bobbed up and down as she moved like her neck was on a string. She kept sobbing even as she jumped to the window. She hung onto the booth, demanding I let her in. And then without warning, she started banging her head against the glass. I tried to calm her down, but all she did was cry and smash her face against the glass. And that's when I saw police lights in the distance. They came from the direction of the town. The patrol car pulled up fast and out stepped the headless officer. He went straight for the woman. He grabbed her and quickly got her off the booth. I could see her struggling to break free as he put her in the back of the police car. I did the only thing I could think of. I put a hand up and I saluted the headless officer. Rules are rules. He returned the gesture before driving off with the crying woman. I settled back into the booth and figured I'd call Dad to ask what the hell was going on. Who was that headless cop? But of course my phone had no signal. The questions would have to wait until morning. I glanced at my watch. It was almost 2 a.m. A beat-up green pickup truck covered in rust rolled up to the booth. It looked like it would fall apart any minute. The driver was an old woman who began fumbling for a penny as she reached the toll arm. And that was when I remembered one of the rules. Do not accept anything from the old woman. I wasn't entirely sure if this was the old woman the rule mentioned. But at this point, I was not taking any chances. I quickly hit the button to raise the arm. No need for that, ma'am. You can go right ahead, I told her, trying to sound as polite as possible. But she wouldn't have it. She insisted on paying, pushing this dirty coin at me. I reassured her. Really? Look, it's okay. You don't have to pay tonight. But that made her more agitated, shoving the coin closer to me. I looked at the coin she was so desperate to give me. It wasn't even a penny. It was larger, weirdly shimmering under the moonlight. The longer I looked at it, the more it seemed to flicker, like it wasn't entirely real. Please just go through, okay? I said. I didn't want anything to do with that coin. Whatever was going on with it, it didn't feel right. Despite my protest, the old woman wouldn't budge. She leaned closer to me. Do you know who I am, young man? I shook my head and took a step back. I've never seen you before, I said. She laughed. I've known you since you were born, James. I've been here every time a child was born in Eden, ever since your ancestors first settled this land and made a deal with me. As she spoke, I noticed the rust from her truck begin to spread like a disease. It crawled up the sides and over the hood. It didn't stop there. The rust spread to her, creeping onto her skin. It flaked off her whenever she moved. She continued, her eyes locking onto mine. Your town owes much to that deal, boy. We had an agreement. Safety and prosperity for Eden in exchange for certain concessions. Her words made my stomach drop. I didn't want to believe her, but the fear in her eyes and the supernatural spread of her rust were all too real and immediate to just dismiss. What kind of deal? I asked. She smiled, the rust on her lips cracking. A deal that's kept this place alive and thriving. The rust was now eating away at her clothes, hands, and her face. Her features slowly started turning less human. It was like she was slowly turning into a statue. Remember, James, every rule has its reason. Every pact has its price, she said, her voice becoming a croak as the rust claimed her throat. With a final nod, she threw the coin on the road and drove toward town, her truck leaving a trail of rust particles in the air. I watched until her headlights disappeared into the darkness, turning my attention back to the ground where she dropped the coin. But it wasn't a coin anymore. Lying there in the dust was something else, a giant dirty fingernail. But I didn't have time to dwell on it. Headlights shone in the distance, but these looked different. They weren't from a car this time, but a motorcycle. It rolled up to the booth from out of town, its engine cutting through the quiet of the night. The guy riding it wore sunglasses. I thought that was weird, considering it was pitch black outside. He pulled up to pay the toll, pushing up his sunglasses to flash me a smile and a thumbs up as he passed through. But something went horribly wrong just as he got past the toll arm. He suddenly lost control of his bike, which skidded across the road, leaving harsh black marks on the asphalt. The motorcycle crashed, and the motorist ended up pinned underneath, not moving. Hey, you okay? I called out, my heart racing. He groaned in response and weakly raised his arm, signaling for me to come over and help. I was about to leave the booth when I remembered the rule. Ignore all cries for help. I was conflicted. I wanted to help him, but those rules, they were there for a reason, right? Just then, I smelled gasoline in the air. A fire erupted from the bike, and the motorist started screaming. Thick black smoke rose, making it hard to see what was happening to the guy. My instinct screamed at me to do something, and I was just about to leave the booth when he started calling out my name. But wait, how did he know my name? I never told him. I paused, my hand on the booth door. Another rule flashed in my mind. Do not respond to your name. His scream sounded real enough, but the way he said my name, it felt off. It was calm and monotone, almost like it was a recording playing over his cries for help. It didn't sit right with me. I hesitated as the flames grew, reaching maybe 7 feet high. The screams grew louder, more high-pitched, but I'd hear my name every few seconds. It sounded like it was being dubbed over the screams. Just then, the familiar police car appeared down the road, and it pulled up right to the burning wreckage. The headless officer stepped out. He walked straight into the flames and carried out the motorist. He didn't even look human anymore. He looked more like a being made of fire. He walked normally as the headless officer guided him to the back seat of the cop car. I gave the officer another salute. The road cleared, and the car drove away. There was no trace of the wrecked motorcycle or the fire now. I kept staring at the road. I felt sick at how close I'd come to breaking a rule. I was snapped out of it as I heard a loud banging coming from inside the booth. I followed the sound to a small bathroom mirror above the sink. I hesitated, and I remembered the rule about not looking at mirrors between 3 and 4 a.m. It wasn't quite that time yet, so I quickly looked. My saw nearly knocked the wind out of me. In the mirror, another version of myself was desperately banging on the glass. It wore my clothes, but they were torn and filthy. A nasty cut was bleeding down its cheek, and its fists were bloody as it pounded against the glass. The reflection looked utterly terrified, eyes wide with panic. Remembering the rule about mirrors, I glanced at my watch. It was still a few minutes shy of 3 a.m. So technically, I could still look, but what I saw was making me wish I had. Turning back to the mirror, I noticed that headlights appeared in the distance behind my desperate reflection. I spun around to check the road, but it was empty. No car, no lights, nothing. Looking back in the mirror, I saw a vehicle had pulled up to the booth. It was an ambulance, and my reflection pounded harder on the glass. I watched horrified as a tall man in a dark suit stepped out of the ambulance. The weirdest part, he was wearing a pig mask. The man in the pig mask reached the booth in the mirror and did something unthinkable. He crawled right through the small booth window. I rechecked my watch. It was precisely 3 a.m. I forced myself to look away from the mirror. Behind me, the banging grew louder, more frantic. I could feel each thud vibrating through the floor of the booth. It sounded like bones cracking as the reflection punched the mirror even harder. I squeezed my eyes shut, placing my hands over my ears as I tried to block out the noise. The rule was clear: do not engage with a mirror from 3 to 4 a.m. I had to ignore it no matter what happened. As I stood there, trying to block out the horrific sounds from the mirror, the bone-cracking sound suddenly stopped. But it was quickly replaced by a new, equally disturbing sound. A loud, wet thudding. It was repetitive and consistent, and each thump sounded wetter than the last. Just then, a car rolled up to the toll booth. Trying to look normal, I took the driver's penny and I raised the toll booth to let them through. The driver gave me a nod and drove off. Nothing unusual there. Then another car came, and another. Each driver looked completely normal and paid the toll without any fuss. For a moment, I almost felt normal, like I was working a regular toll job, except it wasn't. It was 3 a.m. on some backcountry road. It shouldn't be this busy. Who were these people heading in and out of town? Something was off. The steady stream of cars seemed too timed, too regular. Throughout it all, that awful, pulpy thumping sound continued against the mirror. It was relentless. And as I waved through the next car, I heard a new sound. I could hear the sound of pigs in between each thud. Squealing, snuffling, even the occasional snort. It was unmistakable. I tried to focus on the road, the drivers paying their tolls, anything but the sounds behind me. But it was hard. The thudding seemed to grow louder and more desperate with each passing minute. It felt like each sound was being drilled into my brain. As soon as the clock struck 4 a.m., the familiar sight of the police car cut through the darkness. It was the headless officer again. But this time, something was strapped to the roof of his car. It was a giant pig head, much larger than any I'd ever seen. The thing was so big, it looked like it might just fall off at any second. This wasn't like any pig you'd picture. It had a face covered in thick matted hair. It had jagged teeth that stuck out from its mouth. Yellow pus dripped from its nostrils. The strangest part, it had antlers growing out of its head. As he passed by the booth, I remembered the rules and I gave the headless officer a quick salute. The moment his car passed through, the disturbing thumping noise haunting me from the mirror, it just stopped. I sighed with relief. I checked my watch. It was safe now. Cautiously, I turned to look at the mirror. It looked normal, like any other mirror, except for a small crack in the center. As the night wore on, the booth settled into a routine. Sometimes the radio I listened to would turn to that weird station, Radio Harmony. It would play some gospel music before flipping back to my rock tunes. I tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the road and the cars that came through. And then a white van approached the booth. As it neared, the driver rolled down the window to pay the toll. That's when I noticed something alarming. His head was turned entirely backward, as if somebody had twisted his neck. Struggling to maintain my composure, I quickly allowed the van to pass. As it drove away, I saw more faces in the back window. They were all staring at me, their heads also twisted backward. Not long after, a woman driving a shiny green pickup pulled up. The truck was so new, it practically gleamed under the booth light. She leaned out to pay, and she asked if I'd seen her mother drive by. I couldn't be sure. So many cars had come and gone. The woman just laughed, a light, carefree sound that seemed out of place with everything that happened. She drove off, leaving a trail of flower petals on the road behind her. As dawn approached, and I counted the minutes until my shift ended at 6 a.m., I suddenly heard what sounded like a crowd of footsteps in the distance. I squinted down the road, trying to make sense of the shape approaching the toll booth. As it drew closer, the sound clarified into the scuttling of numerous legs against asphalt. What came out of the darkness was horrifying. A giant, dark centipede with a human head at the front. The rest of its body stretched out into segmented lengths down the road, rushing towards me. This was not mentioned in any rules. As it reached the booth, it started slamming against the window. Up close, I could see that its body was made up of stitched-up skins, so gruesomely put together that I couldn't tell if they were human. Despite the violence of its actions, the centipede's human face remained eerily calm. As it continued to smash its body against the toll booth with each crash, I felt the booth shake, the structure straining under the assault. The centipede monster began to wrap its long body around the booth, constricting it like a snake. The windows fogged up with the press of its dark, stitched skin against the glass, and soon I could barely see outside. The booth creaked and groaned under the pressure. I backed away from the windows. I didn't know what to do. The rules had prepared me for a lot, but nothing like this. Through the twisted, stitched mass of the centipede monster, I could see the flashing of police lights in the distance. Thinking about all the times the headless officer had saved me, I scrambled to raise the toll arm, hoping somehow it might signal him or anyone else who could see me. Suddenly, there was a loud crash outside, and the booth shook violently. The centipede creature hissed, its grip tightening around the booth. I couldn't see what was happening outside. Then gunshots rang out, followed by wet, chopping sounds, like something being cut or torn apart. The booth went dark. I could only wait, hoping that it was over. More gunshots erupted, closer this time. The booth shook again, worse than before. It was so forceful that it threw me off my feet and must have knocked me out. Everything went black. When I came to, my alarm was beeping. 6:30 a.m., the early morning light filtered through the booth. To my shock, everything looked normal. No signs of a monster, no damage, no headless officer. Just silence and the sunrise. I felt the dull ache where I hit my head, but I picked myself up and I made my way back to town. As I approached, I saw my dad waiting for me. His expression was serious, and there was a hint of concern in his eyes. Now, do you understand why the rules are important? Why must someone always be at the toll booth at night? He asked. I nodded. Good at night, he asked. I nodded, still processing everything. But what was that thing? The centipede? I asked. His face grew somber. We call it the skin taker. It's why we don't let anyone go out of town at night. It doesn't come often. I'm sorry it came on your first shift, he said. I think I was saved by that headless officer, I said, trying to make sense of the night's events. Dad nodded. The rule about saluting him, it's a new one. He's been trying to get his head back from that thing for decades now. In the meantime, he helps out at the booth when he can. And then Dad paused, smiled, and said one last thing. He'll always protect you, you know. You're his great-grandson. Are you sure, mister? Roger. Rachel asked me upon hearing my request. We were outside of her family home, a big but cozy-looking house in a small town near the Appalachians. My pickup truck idled behind us, parked on the side of the road as we sat there knee-deep in snow. She'd invited me inside for warmth and a cup of tea when I arrived, but I was in a hurry, so I turned her down. I wanted to get it over with as fast as possible, then be on my way. We don't rent out the cabin during the winter. The area is too dangerous during this time of year, Rachel said, trying to dissuade me from my course of action. And she wasn't wrong. The thick snowfall turned the world into a white, shining, slippery mess. One wrong step, one daring turn of the steering wheel, and I'd be in big trouble. But I wasn't worried about the weather or the cold. They'd be the least of my issues. Some friends told me you do. They said your family rented them the cabin for Christmas the past few years. I said, feigning ignorance. They must have gotten us confused for someone else, Rachel said. My parents haven't rented the cabin during winter for as long as I can remember. How so? I asked, curious to see what her answer would be. Did she already know? Did she have me figured out? Did she see through the fake name I provided her? From what I understand, a group of people rented it from my grandparents some 30 years ago. The weather trapped them up there for a week. They ran out of supplies and firewood, and all of them died of hunger and hypothermia, Rachel answered. So she didn't know. Not about the avalanche, not about me surviving, and most importantly, not about what we found up there. I couldn't fault her grandparents for hiding it from her. That week is better left forgotten. I know that, and yet I can't bring myself to do it. To uproot these memories and cast them aside. Their roots are too deep. That sounds terrible, I said after a short pause, with a sad expression that was all too real. But we'll be careful. I promise. Look, I have supplies for 2 weeks and an emergency GPS beacon. I jabbed a finger over my shoulder as I talked, pointing at my truck. Its bed was indeed filled with supplies and covered by a tarp that gathered snow. It'll be me, my 2 sons, and their families. We just want a quiet place far away from the city to spend Christmas together, but it's difficult to find one with this pandemic. I understand, mister. Roger, Rachel said sympathetically. But I can't. My parents were clear on it. I'm sure you'll find someone else more than willing to rent you a cabin. Is this close to Christmas? I asked. I doubt it. Look, what was your rate? $140 a night? I'll pay triple with a promise to leave the cabin spotless. I hoped that this would convince her, since this stunt would blow through all the savings I had left. Rachel gave me a surprised look, but seemed to be thinking the offer over. Fine, she said after a few tense moments. No triple rate. I don't want to rob you of your money, but I have a few conditions. Shoot away, miss, I said, faking a dumb old man's smile. Your security deposit will be triple. I know how wild Christmas parties can get, she said with a half smile. Her lips curled just enough to denote that she wasn't malicious, but that she wouldn't take crap from me either. And I will come up there unannounced to check on you guys. Sounds fair. Sounds perfect, I assured her, keeping up my facade. We shook hands and Rachel invited me inside to take care of the transaction away from the prying eyes of her neighbors. I wanted to refuse her at first, seeing as the sun was racing towards the horizon and I was losing precious moments of its protective light. But I gave in. The last thing I needed was for one of her neighbors to call the cops and risk having them crash my little outing. So I followed her inside, shaking my boots of snow and taking off the layers of clothes that protected me from the biting cold. Rachel led me into the living room and had me sit at a small yet comfortable table next to a raging fireplace. She made herself unseen into the kitchen with a promise that she'd be hasty and would return with warm tea. Left alone in the room, I looked at the countless family photos adorning the walls. There were a lot more of them than the last time I passed through here, but the centerpiece was the same. An old family portrait depicting a large group of people hung in the same place above the fireplace, although the yellow sheen it had picked up over the years was new. A Christmas carol began singing gently from another room, and Rachel was humming along to it as she returned in her hands. She carried 2 ceramic cups painted with winter scenes, with steam rising up and out of them and spreading a festive smell. She handed me one, depicting a snowman going down a steep hill atop a sleigh, while she kept the one showing a lumberjack swinging a heavy axe at a fir tree. I took a tentative sip, careful not to burn my tongue on the hot liquid. Clove, cinnamon, orange. I listened and made a show of smacking my lips while taking another sip. And it's subtle, but I'd be willing to bet apple cider. Rachel gave a short, courteous laugh. She blew air into her own mug a couple of times and took a sip as well. Good thing we weren't betting then, mister. Roger, she said with a soft smile. I shrugged my shoulders, returning her smile and kindness. 30 years of making tea and cooking Christmas dinners for everyone will do that to a person, I said. And oh, how much I wished for that to be the truth, for me to cook for a large family, toiling between stoves and pots, only to see their smiles around the dinner table. How I wished for my reality to be different, for me to not cook dinner all by myself, no matter the occasion. But reality is cold, bitter, and apologetic. It never cared much for my wishes. I bet, Rachel said, her smile extending a little. And you'd win that bet, I said, burying the painful memories that threatened to surface under sweet lies. After all, at that moment, I wasn't Aiden. I was a 50-something-year-old man and a widower with no family to speak of for the last 30 of those years. No, I was sweet old Mr. Roger, with a large family waiting for my word back at home, hoping to spend Christmas together at this particular cabin that claimed everything from Aiden. A sweet lie, a masquerade so convincing that I wanted to believe in it myself for as long as possible. So, I spoke before Rachel got to talk. Is that portrait over there of your grandparents? I asked, pointing at the photo. Yes, Rachel said, and I could feel her love for them radiating from her words. My grandparents, my young mother and father, and all the aunts, uncles, and cousins on my father's side. She looked at it longingly for a moment, and it didn't take me long to realize why. Her grandparents were about my age when that photo was taken. They were probably no longer among the living. Regretting the scars I opened up in her, I steered the conversation in a more cheery direction. So I take it that sweet little girl in a summer dress is you, I asked. Mr. Roger, do I have a sixth sense by any chance? Rachel asked with amusement, and I took her jab with a proud smile. Right again. That's 5-year-old me, holding my mother's hand. I was a clumsy kid and needed support. I wanted to tell her that she'd grown into a splendid woman since the last time I saw her, that the fire she carries in her eyes right now is something she's always possessed, passed down from her mother, who got it from her grandmother. But I abstained. Oh, don't worry about it, I said. Most young kids are like that. I should know. We exchanged some more pleasant small talk after that. I was enjoying my time with Rachel so much, I was so engrossed in the Mr. Roger persona that the passage of time escaped my notice. The grandfather clock in the room striking 3 in the afternoon was what opened my eyes, and I realized it was too late to make the drive and the trek up to the cabin today. Nightfall would catch even a young lad in his prime on that attempt, of which I was neither. Mike, how time has passed, I said. I'm so sorry for taking so much of it from you, miss. Let's conclude the payment, then I'll be on my way. Oh, it's not a problem, Rachel reassured me. Your company is a pleasure, mister. Roger, you're not holding me back from anyone. Don't worry. I'm all alone here. I didn't want to probe her on the matter. It wasn't my place, and I had no interest in it either. But the sad expression that flashed across her face for a split second told me everything I needed to know. She had no husband or children to speak of. With her parents away to spend Christmas somewhere else, she was left to spend it alone. With a knowledge of the craft that only comes with time and practice, Rachel calculated my security deposit and rates for 4 days up at the cabin in a heartbeat. She displayed the total for me and wanted to walk me through the process to assure me that she wasn't asking for a single extra penny. But I refused, partly because math was never one of my fortes, and partly because I believed her. I pulled out my wallet, handed her the money down to the last dollar, and got up to leave. Well, it's been a pleasure, Miss Rachel, but it's getting late. I'm afraid I have to go. She got up to see me to the door, following with delicate steps that pitter-pattered on the hardwood floor. I reached the coat hanger where I'd left my padded jacket and went to retrieve it, but Rachel stopped me. Are you planning to go up to the cabin right away, mister? Roger, she asked, making no attempt to hide the worry in her voice. Yes, I lied. I wouldn't try to. I reconciled with the idea that I would spend a night in my truck, but that was something that sweet little Rachel didn't need to know. Don't you have a place to stay around here? It's almost dark outside. It would be too dangerous for you to attempt it. I don't. I admitted, knowing full well where this was going. The only thing I didn't know for sure is if I was on board with it or not. Then stay here until morning, Rachel offered, beaming at the prospect of company. No, I can't, I said, though at that point I would have regretted her taking me up on my words and retracting the offer. I've been enough of a bother for one evening. Oh, don't be silly, mister. Roger, Rachel said, reaching for my hand and cupping it with both of hers. Small, warm, soft things, so out of place around my burly, calloused palms. For a moment, I felt like a grandparent accosted by a loving grandchild. There's plenty of room in the guest bedroom, free of charge. Well, how can I argue with that? I said, smiling down at her. I'll just go to the truck quickly. I have to turn off the engine and call everyone. I'll fix us up with another batch of tea then, she said, and took off towards the kitchen with a newfound spring in her steps. Oh, and pull the truck into the driveway. Wouldn't want to risk a ticket. What a lovely woman, I caught myself thinking as I dressed up. Just like I said I'd do, I walked out to the truck. I pulled it into the driveway like Rachel asked me to, and faked a short phone call in case she watched me through a window. Though thinking back on it, I did it more for myself than for her, to help the lie along in the vain hope its roots would dig deep enough tonight to uproot my reality. Back inside the house, I heard Rachel calling for me from the kitchen. Her words guided me towards the well-furnished and equipped room, and I found a chair ready for me at the empty table. I sat down, picking up the sleighing snowman cup that she refilled with fresh steaming tea. Rachel had put on an apron while I was gone, a frilly black thing that would have been right at home in a housewife cooking show. Not that I watch any of those. She did laps between cabinets and the double fridge, retrieving pots and pans and ingredients that she carefully gathered on the table. It didn't take me long to guess the menu based on the items in front of me. Let me help with that, I offered. She stopped dead in her tracks, perched on her toes as she tried to reach a high cupboard. A quick swivel had her facing me, and I could see she hadn't grasped the exact meaning of my words. Sure thing, she said, taking a step away as I walked over to her and retrieved the box that her fingers could barely touch. I meant with the cooking in general, I clarified. Her fingers paused briefly around mine, her attempt at getting the box from me cut short. Considerate payment for the room, and the plate I assume I'll be getting. Correct assumption again, mister. Roger, she said, her deer in the headlights look vanishing in favor of her smile. You're on a roll tonight, and fine, but just know that I'll feel bad about accepting your help the entire time. Another playful jab, this one a bit more daring, but not any less obvious. I took it with a grin and helped her pick out the final bits and bobs. We stood side by side, taking in the chaotic assortment of ingredients laid out haphazardly in front of us. Whatever we make, it has to be both fast and flavorful. I decided taking the lead from her, which felt disrespectful. Yes, I was in her kitchen after all. But it didn't look like she was making any progress on pinpointing any particular recipe. True, she admitted. Any suggestions? We went back and forth for a few minutes, bouncing ideas off of each other until we settled on a menu that we were both satisfied with. Buttery mashed potatoes, an assortment of roasted veggies, roasted turkey breast, a spiced cranberry sauce, a gingerbread trifle for dessert, and a quick and dirty eggnog to get tipsy. For the more culinary literate ones among you. Yes, all of those things are anything but fast, especially the turkey. But here's a quick tip while I'm at it. Butterfly your turkey breasts. It'll cut down on your cooking time considerably without sacrificing any of the flavor. At any rate, I'm not here to host a cooking show. After spending a few more minutes discussing the details of the recipes, which is a crucial detail if you cook along with someone else, we sprang into action. Rachel tackled the mashed potatoes and roasted veg. I took on the turkey, the cranberry sauce, and the trifle, and we decided to meet in the middle for the eggnog while helping each other out here or there when an extra pair of hands was needed. Dashing between the pots by her side was a lovely time, to the point I didn't mind how long it took for everything to cook. And by her smile and fancy demeanor, I figured she didn't mind either. We were both having a blast, one that we didn't know we desperately needed, until we received it. Taking a short breather after I deposited the well-seasoned turkey breast in the oven next to Rachel's veggies, I couldn't help but watch her for a while. The smile on her lips, the way her hips swayed as she kept on her toes, her warm presence that brightened the atmosphere. She reminded me so much of my Jennifer, my sweet, lovely Jennifer. The fun times we had as young, reckless kids. All the hikes and traveling we did as young adults. She'd been the soul of the party wherever we went. And more than that, she'd been my soul. The integral part that made me. She was my one and only. The person I wanted by my side through thick and thin. The woman I wanted to age with. My mind threatened to sink like a cannonball. Down into the murky waters of what-ifs and could-have-beens, and I was entirely unprepared to stop it. Just as always, I was about to go on a stroll down memory lane to watch my being slowly splinter into a million pieces while I peered uselessly at the resulting shards that I didn't know how to pick up and put back together into the hole they'd once been. I guess Rachel noticed my thousand-yard stare, the way my eyes fixated on a point millions of miles away. She froze, looking at me with worry from the other side of the kitchen. "Mr. Roger," she asked, taking a tentative step towards me. "Are you okay? Do you need to sit down? I'll fetch you a glass of water." As I came to my senses, my mind easing back into the present, I caught my reflection on the smooth surface of the refrigerator. Blurry as it was, I could still make out just how pale my skin went. I said, the words leaving my throat weak and frail. "I'm fine, Jen. No need to worry. A glass of water would do me plenty good." I went around the table, sitting down in my chair, as I tried to regain my composure. Rachel got a clean glass from a cabinet and filled it with ice-cold water from the fridge. She rushed over to me, putting the glass in my hands and leaning over me as she checked my forehead with the back of her hand. A sweet gesture, but completely misguided, since panic attacks don't bring about fever. "Thanks," I said, taking a glass from her and taking a hearty swig. "And please stop calling me mister. Just Roger is fine." "Okay, Roger," Rachel said. "Are you okay? Do you have any medication you need to take?" She knelt in front of me as she talked, staring into my eyes and cupping my hand with both of hers. The amusement in her eyes was gone, its place taken by an urgency and worry for my well-being that I didn't like nearly as much. No, I'm fine," I reassured her. "I'm not that old. It was just a harmless panic attack, that's all. I'll be right as rain in a few." She didn't seem convinced by my words, but she got up. The food didn't care about my panic attack. It kept boiling and threatened to burn regardless of my mental state. She did another lap of the kitchen, stirring what needed to be stirred, tasting and adding salt to what needed more of it. But it was clear that she got scared by my episode. "Hey, look," I said when I could take it no longer and got to my feet. "I'm fine. Promise. I'll help you finish up. It's too much for a single person." It's just that. She stuttered. If I feel bad, I'll sit back down, I said, getting back to my cooking duties. Pinky swear? Rachel asked out of the blue. I turned to find her next to me, with her hand extended and her pinky finger wiggling around. Pinky swear, I said, twisting my own pinky finger around hers. I'll be fine, okay. She accepted, and her smile made a shy but welcome comeback. I promise I'll watch you more carefully to make sure you're fine. With the strain of my episode hanging in the air, we continued cooking. Rachel warmed back up after a while, and by the time dinner was ready, she was cracking jokes again. We met up in the middle for the eggnog like we initially planned, poured ourselves a healthy glass of it, and plated it up. Dinner was tasty, but I didn't expect any less from the two of us at that point. She proved she could hold her own in the kitchen next to a veteran cook like myself. "You're an amazing chef," she said as she tasted my contributions to the menu. "Mrs. Jen is one lucky lady getting to eat like this every night. That's if you do all the cooking, of course." I didn't mean to. No, I said, but did a double take as her words finally hit me. "Where?" I stammered, feeling myself go white again. "Where do you know that name from?" Rachel looked taken aback. She fumbled her utensils, dropping her spoon into her bowl as she tried to form words. That's what you called me when I came to help you earlier." She muttered, and I figured, did I? I said, waving a hand through the air to defuse the situation. "Don't mind that. I just tend to get a bit confused at times, mixing up times and places, you know." I returned to eating, hoping Rachel would drop it. To my dismay, she didn't. Her curiosity was mounting to levels beyond her ability to hold in. But don't get me wrong, I don't blame her or anything. I would have just preferred if she didn't try to dig deeper. I'm sorry for prying," she said timidly. "I hope I didn't cause you discomfort by assuming there's a missus." Jen? I sighed, finished what was already scooped up in my spoon, and placed it down next to my plate. "There was a missus, Jen." I corrected and felt the mood sour right away a long time ago. "Sorry for bringing it up. Thank you for the delicious meal." Rachel instantly went as cold as the snow outside, but I couldn't fault her for it. The turns this evening took were probably as confusing for her as they were numerous. Not knowing how to feel about me anymore was only natural for her. I reminded myself that I was still a stranger in her house no matter how well we clicked up to that point, and I was a seemingly mentally unstable stranger to top it off. She cleared the table, gathered the leftovers into airtight plastic containers she placed into the refrigerator for later, and began washing the dishes. All of the wind in her sails was gone, and I couldn't help but feel guilty, both for blowing said wind and for leading her on like I did. I didn't want to admit it. I intentionally misread her signals in my deluded attempt to find out what having a child or grandchild would feel like, and to top it all off, to my complete and utter disgust for myself as a person. Near the end, I did start seeing her for the beautiful, flirtatious woman that she was, and I liked what I saw. I excused myself from the table, asked for the bathroom and the guest room, and followed the directions Rachel provided. By the time I was done splashing cold water into my face in order to help me sober up, she was done in the kitchen and heading up to her own room. She only briefly paused by the half-open door, handing me the keys to the cabin. "I might sleep in a bit late," she told me. "Help yourself to the leftovers in the fridge. You'll need the strength for the truck. I'll come to check on you and your family like I promised. Good night." I wished her as she left, but my words went unanswered. The only thing I heard was her locking the door to her room from the inside. I made it to the guest room a few minutes later, finding a tidy bed with a nightstand and a drawer next to it. The space was cramped but homely, and most importantly, it was warm. I dressed down to my shirt and boxers, seeing as I had no pajamas at hand, and walked over to the large window after folding my clothes neatly and placing them on the nightstand. Free of my soft boots, my prosthetic left foot clicked against the floor at every step. I said that this was a small town, but I'm partly wrong in that assessment. It's just 2 lines of houses, one on each side of a central road, populated entirely by people, with land up in the mountains and cabins for rent all year round. The window of my temporary abode faced the backyard, which ended with a sturdy fence that kept out the countless miles of untainted forest that sprawled behind it. I had a nice view of the breathtaking wilderness, and I put it to good use for a while, standing by the window and peering out. I had one question that desperately needed answering, so I reached for the window's handle and opened it wide. The cold winter winds invaded the room right away, sapping it of warmth and sending chills down my exposed body. But I didn't pull away. I pushed into the frigid air, allowing it to freeze me further as I sharpened my hearing. The minute background noises of the pine forest grew more apparent until I could make out the distant sound of critters going about their nightly business. A few minutes later, on the verge of hypothermia, I heard what I was waiting for. The forest went quiet for miles and miles across, and a howl descending from the highest mountaintops claimed that silence for itself. It was such an ugly, soul-rending call that it managed to chill me in a manner that the coldest air couldn't hope to match. A warped, unnatural mix, somewhere between man and the lowest form of beast to walk this earth. The scream of endless hunger and agony aimed solely at me. I jumped back from the window, having gotten all the confirmation I needed. After closing it, I turned the radiator up all the way, and all but nearly hugged it to warm myself faster. The stunt I pulled was risky. So long as I was cold, the beast could find me. But it was the only way I knew to drag it out of hiding and have it make its presence known. When the sensation returned to my toes and fingers, and I was sure I was warm enough to not be found anymore, I went to sleep. I covered myself with a thick blanket and succumbed to a fitful sleep. Morning came fast, leaving me surprised when the sun's first rays reflected off of the spotless snow and into my room. It had been a long time since I last slept without an eye open, 3 decades now to the day, feeling well rested. I got dressed and left Rachel's house. As tempted as I was, I didn't take any of the leftovers. By 8 a.m., I was already driving. The furthest point up the mountain I could reach with my truck was about half an hour away, and I had a 3-hour brutal trek through knee-deep snow to look forward to. After that, I wasn't exactly enthused about it, but I was hasty regardless. I parked the truck in the clearing where the road ended, locked it up, and took to its bed. The first thing to come out from under the tarp was a sleigh, followed closely behind by the harness I'd used to pull it. More items came, and I strapped them all firmly to the sleigh. A Dane axe with a silver-coated blade, a chainsaw, a shotgun with both normal and silver pellets, a couple canisters of gasoline, a few jars and vials of my own blood that I gathered and kept refrigerated over the last month or so, and some other miscellaneous items like changes of clothes and a first aid kit. Starting through the snow, I soon hit the incline that would only grow steeper as I advanced. The path I took was one I knew, and I used familiar landmarks to guide my way. A weird-shaped tree here, a large boulder that hasn't moved in millennia there. They jolted memories in me, and before I knew it, I found myself reminiscing of better times as I trudge ahead. Laughter and banter among friends spawned between the trees, echoing through my mind as if they were real and not merely echoes from a different era. Snow crunching beneath our boots as we merrily made our way toward a much-expected vacation. Jennifer by my side, me inhaling her intoxicating perfume with each labored breath. The sensation of her warm skin against mine. It was enough to bring me to tears in the middle of the forest, hours away from anyone. I cried. The salty drops running down my cheeks froze in the frigid air, threatening my skin with streaks of frostbite. After a while, seeing that the cabin was about 2 miles away, I wiped the tears and refocused on the task at hand. It's a good place to start. I mumbled to no one in particular. I pulled out the first vial of blood and bit down on its cap to remove it with an arching motion. I spilled it over the pine needles and fresh snow behind me, careful to not get any on the sleigh. My speed faltered as the incline grew beneath me, but I kept going, marking the forest behind me with blood every 500 feet or so. After 20 vials and the realization that I miscalculated the distance, I opened one of the jars as well and dipped my gloved fingers into it. 3 more markings later, I reached the clearing that the cabin was built in. I expected another flood of painful memories when I laid eyes on it, but I was pleasantly surprised to find out it wasn't the case. The cabin itself looked nothing like I remembered it. But then again, why did I think it would? After that week we spent it, of course it needed to be rebuilt. And rebuilt, it was bigger and better than its former incarnation. I pulled up to its porch, releasing myself from the sleigh's harness and leaving it behind as I entered. The inside had a slight smell to it, which, along with a fine layer of dust that settled on everything, was a dead giveaway that the cabin hadn't been used since the first snowfall this season. After a hasty check of all the rooms, I looked at my wristwatch. It read 1 p.m., which meant that the trek took me longer than expected. Now, if I may be allowed to toot my own horn for just a bit, I'm in great shape for my age. I'm my own cook, so I eat well. I'm my own personal trainer, and God knows I've not gone easy on myself. Most nights I can't find my limbs after strenuous bouts of workout. I don't drink. I don't smoke. In fact, the last 30 years of my life have been spent solely on preparing for tonight. Time used to better my mind, body, and arsenal, also I could see this one night through. But even with all of that, I can't compare to a man half my age. Despite my best efforts, the passage of the years robbed me of my vigor little by little. The only aspect of me that hasn't faltered in the slightest is my determination. If anything, it only grew stronger. Then I put it to good use. After lighting the fireplace in the cabin to warm it up, I went outside, checked and fueled the chainsaw, and took to the forest. It had a wide selection of trees just ripe for felling, so I got to work. The hours passed, flying by me like summer birds as I cut and cleaned a dozen trees of their branches. With great effort that my back was more than I'm thankful for, I dragged their trunks through the snow and piled them up in the clearing around the cabin. As the sun kissed the horizon and the night threatened to engulf me with its all-consuming darkness, I finished constructing the enormous pyre that I'd need. I doused the wood with the gasoline from one container, allowing it time to soak up the fuel, and had the other container ready next to the pile. The last thing I did before going inside the cabin to warm myself up and catch my breath was to open the 2 jars of blood, leaving one at the edge of the forest and the other one next to the pyre on a log. The sun slowly disappeared, and from my vantage point next to the fireplace, I could see the shroud of nighttime settling across the forest. I waited, biding my time for as long as possible until every last ray of light was gone. My mind was eager to spring into action, but after a grueling day of manual labor, my body had other plans. I soon fell asleep on the chair, lulled into it by the heat of the fire. To my displeasure, my sleep wasn't as restful as it had been at Rachel's house. The night terrors I'd grown accustomed to return to haunt me again, offering me a sweet release from the present, only to tear it away from me. I was back down the mountain, trekking through the December snow with my friends and my soon-to-be wife. The date was the 24th of December 1991, and I was a strapping young lad of only 25 years of age. With my future looking bright and my fiancée next to me, I felt invincible, king of the world as far as I was concerned. Seeing as we were planning our wedding and our years were slowly advancing beyond parties and travel and into settling down, finding good-paying jobs and starting a family, me and Jennifer decided to throw one last party like the good old times. We saved up money all year round and got 4 more of our closest friends to join us in what might have been our final outing as a group. We found a cheap cabin far away from civilization so we wouldn't disturb anyone's Christmas night with our loud music and drinking. The hike took hours, but with Jen by my side to keep me going, I felt no cold or exhaustion to speak of Michael, David, and myself. The 3 men in the group pulled the sleighs with supplies. Jennifer, Kelly, and Lori followed us closely, talking between themselves about anything and everything that they talked about when they weren't pestering us. David and Lori were getting ready for marriage, just like me and Jen, and Michael and Kelly were already married with a kid back home, just wanting to break free from their busy lives for a few nights. By the time we reached the cabin, evening was only hours away. Me, Michael, and David were hasty in setting up the battery-powered cassette player, and before long, music was blasting out of it. The girls warmed up the pre-packaged food, drinks were being passed around from the portable cooler, and by nightfall we had a proper party raging on. One we planned to extend into the early hours of the next morning. I'm tempted to say that it was the best party of my life, but I know I'd be lying. I only see it that way now because it was the last party where I actually felt good. The fun reached a crescendo around midnight. We were all properly drunk by then, dancing and bumping into each other in the small cabin. Michael needed to relieve himself of surplus liquids, so he went to the outhouse. He was barely gone for half a minute before he barged back inside. His eyes, wild and fear, plastered across his face. "Guys, come outside right now." By the urgency in his voice and his out-of-character attitude, we knew he wasn't messing with us. We dropped whatever we were doing and we followed him into the clear winter night. Flashlights at the ready. Hushed murmurs rippled through the group. We were all worried and wondering what the hell had scared Michael so bad. There, he said, and pointed towards one of the mountain tops. What the hell is that? Our collective sights followed his finger, settling on a peak looming above us, but none of us could make anything out. Turn off the lights and the music, Michael ordered. David complied. He was in and out of the cabin in a heartbeat, leaving us stranded in soul-crushing darkness and silence. With nothing left to pollute my senses, my eyesight and hearing sharpened. Against the spotless white snow and ice that engulfed the cliff faces, I saw a shadow emerge. The longer I stared at it, the more I could feel my mind fracture, as if it wasn't something that my mortal eyes were meant to witness. Still, from this far away, I couldn't make out much of it, save for its eyes that seemed to glow in the night like a pair of bloody stars. "Why is it so quiet?" Jen asked. I hadn't even noticed her get next to me and wrap her arms around mine, pushing herself into me in her startled state. But as soon as she brought it up, I could hear it as well. A complete and utter lack of sound, except for our own breathing and shuffling through the snow. "Do you guys see it now?" Michael asked. We didn't get to answer him. The creature, let out a howl unlike anything I've heard before or since. The call of endless winter. A bone-shattering cold and gut-wrenching hunger. Its voice reverberated down the mountain, echoing through the valleys and piercing our ears with its volume. It lasted for what felt like a lifetime, forcing images of fates worse than death into my mind. I saw all of us huddled around a dying fire deep in the forest, cupping our palms around the dying embers in a last futile attempt to warm up, the days and nights passing with no hope of salvation, growing ever more hungry and thirsty until we turned feral and set our sights on each other. I saw the bloodshed, the bodies, flesh rendered from bone and shoved between greedy, clacking teeth. But it wasn't real. None of it was real. We wouldn't do that. We couldn't do that. Lost in the visions, I didn't see the creature wave an arm towards us. I didn't see the sheer force of its action tear through the layers of snow, feeling it in slabs that slid down the slope. The others told me of all that later. Avalanche, one of them said, though I can't for the life of me remember which one. Their cry, and Jen pulling at my arm with desperation, was what finally broke the creature's spell over me. With the avalanche picking up speed and mass as it plowed down a mountainside towards us, we took shelter in the only safe place around for miles. We huddled in the center of the cabin, hoping that the structure was sound enough to withstand the assault. When it finally hit, the avalanche sounded like a thunderstorm mixed in with an earthquake. The world around us shook from its very core, sending us flying every which way as we tried to hold steady against it. And then, as soon as it had started, the calamity ended, leaving us gasping in terror. A scream reverberating from outside the cabin woke me up before the nightmare got to the worst part. I jolted in the seat, strangely thankful for being spared of the horror that would have followed. With the axe and loaded shotgun in hand, I got outside into the quiet night. My hairs stood on their ends right away, as a feeling of deep anxiety welled within me. This was it, the moment I've been preparing for the past 30 years. My life's goal was within reach, and yet I feared I was woefully unprepared to face it. I walked around a pyre, checking the clearing for signs of the beast. The jar of blood left on the log had been thrown into the snow, licked clean of every last trace of the crimson fluid. Even the snow around where it had landed was gone. The beast was hungry. Leaving the axe next to the one remaining fuel canister, I raised the shotgun in front of myself and marched towards the forest slowly. The beast ran around between the evergreen trees, using them for cover, but I could tell that each one of its steps brought it closer to me. My heart pounded away wildly in anticipation, preparing my body for the fight that would shortly ensue. "Come out," I said into the night, stopping halfway to the tree line. The skittering stopped, sending me on edge. Bouts of laughter emanated from the forest, its echoes making it hard for me to pinpoint the source. "Come out." The beast repeated my words back to me, only they were twisted and slurred, uttered by lips that had grown unaccustomed to human speech. "I'm not screwing around," I pressed. "Come out." "No." "Me neither," the beast said. In one final leap, it flew through the air from the branch where it had been squatting. With a heavy thud, It landed a few feet from the edge of the clearing. My body froze when I laid eyes on it. Skeletal frame that betrayed its decades of malnutrition. The sunken eyes, the retracted lips that exposed diseased gums and teeth charred by decay. The skin turned to a blue and black mess from constant hypothermia and countless frostbites. Clothes torn to rags, and a once beautiful head of dirty blonde hair, reduced to 6 strands, barely hanging onto its scalp. I couldn't take it anymore. I could feel the beginning of another panic attack writhing beneath my skin. My heart rate reached a maximum. My body trembled from its core, and cold sweat poured out of my pores, chilling me to the bone. The mix of impending doom and all-consuming fear sent adrenaline surging through my veins, and I tried to latch onto it, to let it help me through the ordeal soon to follow. Letting go of the shotgun with one hand that I reached towards the beast, with my voice catching in my throat and coming out a hoarse whisper as my rapid breathing cut it short, I uttered a single word. Jen, the first thing we did after the avalanche ended was to take stock of our situation. We were all accounted for, and besides bruises and stumbling and falling, we weren't injured. All of the cabin's windows, as well as both doors, had caved in from the weight of the snow pressing down on them. The puffy white death invaded the already small space, reducing it further and making us feel claustrophobic. We have to dig our way out, I told the others, after we regained our bearings. Seeing as everyone ran around like headless chicken and no one was taking charge of the situation, I decided to do it myself. We got our hands on anything we could use as improvised shovels, which mostly meant plates and cups, and shoveled snow from the front door. But where we took away 1 cup or plate worth, 2 flooded in to take their place. We kept at it, fear and desperation pushing us from behind and stoking the fires of our efforts. When my hands felt like they'd freeze right through and shatter, someone else took my place. We tried for hours and hours until the snow pile that gathered behind us threatened to reach the ceiling, but we made no progress. The avalanche appeared supernatural in scale and intensity, leaving us trapped under a puffy white sea in our little bubble of air. Stop, I said. We're wasting our strength. We have to wait this one out, but we'll freeze to death, Michael interjected. Still, his voice lacked the determination and rebelliousness to drive his point home. He was just as tired and defeated as the rest of us. The owners will notice we're missing, I said. They'll send help when we won't come back down the mountain. They won't, Kelly said from behind me. They said they'll be out of town until after New Year's and asked us to leave the key under the cabin's porch, Lori added. Do you guys ever listen to the people around you? No, David said. No, that's a week away. We can't stay here for an entire week. He devolved into panic, dragging everyone else down with him. Worried whispers grew in intensity, soon turning into an incoherent shouting match. We'll freeze. We'll starve. We'll suffocate. Those were just a few of the worries made vocal. Calm down, I said, but my voice was drowned out by theirs. Calm down. Hearing me louder, everyone fell silent. Their gazes turned to me, expectant and oddly accusatory. We have some drinks left, and we won't starve to death in a week. If we hunker down together for warmth, no one will freeze either. We'll see through this, okay? What about oxygen? David asked. This place is small and really high up. There's not enough of it for a week. Yeah, I answered, but physical effort and panicking will burn through it faster. Look, we don't have to make it an entire week, okay? Just a day or 2 before help comes. I could see they weren't satisfied with my plan. They huddled together away from me in a silent statement of opposition. And if we start running out of oxygen, we can give digging another try as a last resort. Besides, we'll stand a better chance later when the snow settles and freezes. Fine, David gave in. I'm so cold, Jen said, echoing everyone's sentiments. My toes will fall off. Here, Kelly offered. Let's do like Aiden said. Let's huddle together. Lori followed them, and the 3 of them did just that, going over to one of the cabin's corners and hunkering down. When I say the place was small, I'm not kidding. It was very small, an all-in-one kitchen, dining, and living room, with a small pantry and a bedroom connected to one side of it. Let's fetch all the pillows and covers we can, I told the other men. They agreed, so we wordlessly started searching, which didn't take that long. In half an hour, we had a fake bear rug in the corner to isolate the room and all the pillows and blankets in the cabin to keep us warm. We used the bedroom as a changing room, doubling the layers on our skins. And yes, that meant double boxers, pants, blouses, jackets, double everything. We put on all of the spare clothes we brought along. And yet, as insulated as we were, holding each other tight in a collective bear hug, we were still cold. Jess and Lori fell asleep fast, the mix of fatigue and alcohol in their veins doing them in, and I could see the others weren't far behind. "Let's sleep in shifts," I whispered to David and Michael. "The girls need their rest, but someone needs to be awake at all times, in case something else goes wrong." "Yeah," Michael said, though by his voice alone I could tell he wouldn't be the first on guard duty. "Sounds good," David agreed. "I'll take the first shift," I offered, seeing as it had been my idea. I wiggled my way free from the arms holding me tight and got to my feet. Taking a single blanket to wrap myself in, I went and sat down in the chair next to the fireplace. It was one of those boxy things made of steel and suspended off the ground by lanky feet, and we'd kept the fire burning in it for a while last night. Yet as I reached my hands toward it to rob it of the last residual traces of warmth it should have held, I found it completely cold. Something wasn't right, but I couldn't put my finger on it. The cabin had been warm and cozy just before we saw the creature on the peak, and the avalanche blocked us in. No way in hell could it have been so cold already, but it was. Even our own bodies, under all the layers of clothes and blankets, couldn't keep us warm as they should have been able to. I pushed those thoughts aside in favor of thinking of our immediate survival. The others fell asleep, leaving me alone, so I needed to keep my senses sharp and my wits about me in case help arrived. Checking my wristwatch, I saw it was nearing sunrise outside. I'd been awake for nearly 24 hours by that point, but I didn't feel tired. No doubt the result of the shock, but I was thankful regardless. By noon, I'd kept busy by climbing up in the attic and turning off the generator. The damn thing consumed more oxygen, so we couldn't afford to keep it on. It only powered the lights in the cabin anyway. There were no outlets for us to make use of in any meaningful way. With the shoelaces of my spare pair of boots tied into a hangman's knot, I hung one of the flashlight sets on low power from the now-dead light bulb, and I decided I'd done enough for the day. The cold robbed me of my will, making every move feel strenuous. Even thinking about anything in particular left me short of breath. So I simply existed, listening to the others breathe and shift in their sleep. Michael roused from his rest at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Shivering from his core, he got free from beneath a sea of blankets and got to his feet. He wanted to unwind to stretch his body and joints that were sore from the uncomfortable sleeping position on the floor, but he abandoned that course of action when his blouses and jackets threatened to expose his skin. He dragged another chair next to me and sat down on it, rubbing his gloved hands together. "How the hell is it so cold already?" he asked, as the water vapor in his mouth condensed on his wool gloves. "I don't know, man," I admitted with half a mouth. "Are you tired yet?" he asked me. His teeth clattered, slurring his speech. "Out of my mind, yeah. I'm hungry as hell," he said. "I'll grab a bite to eat and take over." "Go catch some shut-eye too." He said I couldn't argue. "Thanks," I said, and pried myself free from the seat. His mention of food made me notice my own peckishness, but I was in no mood to eat. In a matter of moments, I was wrapped in Jen's arms, drifting off to sleep. It felt like a short nap, a blip in my stream of consciousness, before I was awoken by screaming. Jolting to my senses, pushing blankets and pillows aside to get to my feet, I saw the source of the commotion. Michael was on his back, down on the floor, with David on top of him, hurling fists at his face. "What the hell?" I yelled, jumping on David's back to pull him away. He was crazed, outputting more force than I'd ever seen him to. "Son of a bitch ate all my food," David said to me, elbowing me in the face to get me off of him. I stumbled back and crashed to the floor, bringing my hands around my nose. The hit felt like a lightning strike to my face, the cold amplifying the pain of the fresh wound. My gloves came back bloodied, warm liquid soaking through them and reaching the skin beneath. "David, stop," Lori said. The sound of her voice broke David's violent spell. His eyes went wide, darting between his bloodied fists and Michael's disfigured face. Hey, David stuttered. I woke up. I found him eating all our food. He didn't leave anything for us. Not a crumb. I got up and placed my hands on David's shoulders. Having calmed down, he nearly melted under my touch. I guided him to his feet and slowly pulled him aside. In any ensuing silence, I heard Michael muttering something behind broken teeth. Kelly got on her knees next to him, tears streaming down her face, but she kept quiet, trying to hear him. Hungry. I'm so hungry, Michael chanted. Why'd you beat him up so badly? I asked David a bit further away, where the others wouldn't hear us talk. Jen got down next to Michael as well, helping Kelly in her efforts to clean and treat him. Lori just hung out away from everyone with a 1,000-yard stare in her eyes and shock plastered on her face. He ate all the food, okay, but that's not. I'm sorry, David said, cutting over me. His voice quivered, and I knew he was on the verge of crying. I don't know. I don't know what got into me. I didn't mean to, but I snapped. I couldn't control myself. I think it's that thing, that creature, I said. I think it's messing with us somehow, with our minds. I didn't know if I should bring up the visions I had, but seeing as the situation was quickly devolving and suspecting outside interference, I decided to do it. I turned David around, signaled for the girls to pay attention as well, and spoke up. Outside, before the avalanche started, when I looked up at that thing, I said, deliberately making my words slow, when it screamed. It showed me things. Everyone's eyes went wide when they heard that, which was all the proof I needed. Us huddled around a dying fire. David asked, freezing and going hungry. Lori added, eating each other. Jen completed with hesitation. I nodded my head at all of their questions. We'd seen the same thing, the same fate in store for us, and that was all the confirmation I needed, that we were dealing with something beyond the natural and logical, that we needed to be extremely careful if we hoped to make it out alive. The girls finished treating Michael, and we talked some more, swapping theories and comparing notes. We came to the consensus that, given our circumstances, we were much colder and hungrier than we should have been. But beyond that, all seemed normal still, or as normal as things could be right then. Michael remained catatonic after the beating, not answering us or reacting to our presence in any way. Probing and prodding him had no effect, so we decided to leave him be. Not because we didn't care about him. We did care, but we'd done our best with what we had. He needed to rest, to heal, and to let the shock clear from his system. Consumed by guilt, David decided to move to the opposite corner of ours, and naturally, Lori followed him. Afraid for Michael's life and plagued by paranoia, Kelly moved him and herself to another corner of the room as well. Just like that, our group was splintered, bringing down our chances of survival considerably. Despite our better judgment, distrust had been sown, and it managed to take roots in our minds. I'm so hungry too, Jen whispered to me after a while, her stomach growling ever so often. And I'm so cold. Me too, babe, I admit it. I saw her shoot daggers at Michael and Kelly whenever they weren't looking our way, but I lacked the energy and mental fortitude to say anything of substance that might dissuade her and quench her mounting hatred for the two. The mere act of thinking became harder by the second, and I was so out of it that I didn't even think of blaming it on the dwindling concentration of oxygen in the air. More time passed like that. With us growing more and more quiet, our shuffling stopped, and as our minds suffered under the intense hunger and the slow but agonizing suffocation, moments became melting into each other. After a while, I found myself unable to tell minutes apart as longer and longer portions of time slipped between my fingers. For how long had we been there? A day? A week? A lifetime? How long ago had David's attack been? Hours or days? My brain could barely bring itself to ask these questions, and it couldn't answer them when it did. Sleep came in bursts that were hard to measure or distinguish. I found myself slipping in and out of consciousness more and more often, with Jen's cold arms wrapped around me. Over the eternities I spent awake between bouts of darkness, I felt her chest heave slower as her breathing grew labored. I tried to check up on her, but my body's reserves were so low that it refused to even let me speak. In an uncharacteristic moment of awareness, I heard Kelly whisper to Michael. In the all-consuming silence, her words reached me loud and clear, but their meaning eluded me. I urged my mind to focus, to make out letters and syllables and words, to remember enough of the English language for me to understand her. It eventually did, but not without plenty of protesting. Michael, Kelly said, shoving her palms against his chest. I saw air puff out of his nostrils each time she did, turning into fluffy clouds that dispersed as they rose to the ceiling. Please, she urged him. Stay with me, babe. Don't leave me alone. Seeing their state broke my heart. My mind cobbled itself back together enough to spit out misshapen memories of our past together, which only served to deepen my distress. I'd known Michael ever since we were children, having grown on the same quiet street in our small town. He'd always been a great guy, and we made fast friends, spending our summers playing outside way past the bedtimes that our parents failed to enforce. We stuck together through thick and thin, the roots of our friendship extending all the way back into preschool and kindergarten. When it came time to enroll into elementary school, we fought our parents tooth and nail to make sure we go to the same school. Bratty as we were, our parents caved in. Michael's folks were more than happy to enroll him into the local school, but my parents wanted better for me. They wanted to find me a nice school in the nearest big city, but I have none of it. And after countless tantrums and threats that only a 6-year-old can come up with, they relented. Elementary school came and went, filled with its own misadventures. Michael's parents did much better for themselves, and we were both able to afford going to the city for middle school. That's where I first met Jen, and from the first moment I laid eyes on her, she was my ray of sunshine. Not thinking much of it, viewing relationships as nothing more than games, we soon declared ours official. As young love always tends to do, no one expected ours to last, thinking we'd grow bored of each other and of the concept in general. But we didn't. Jen and I were joined at the hip from that day forward, even as our small group steadily grew and we advanced in age. By high school, Michael had found Kelly. And let me tell you, courting her was a nightmare. Me and Jen were his wingmates through all of it, though, and our help paid off when Kelly finally agreed to go out on a date with him. We, of course, made it a double date, and we all had a blast. After that day, Kelly joined our group as Michael's girlfriend. More friends came and went, but none stuck around for too long. I don't think I could list them all for the simple fact that I can't remember them all anymore. David and Lori are the clear exception to that rule, however. Transfer students from the faraway land of I can't remember the names of their towns. They arrived in separate boxes that were soon a bundle deal. Desperate as they were to fit in with any group, they ended up in ours, and we welcomed them with open arms. In all of our time together as a group, we had our fair share of arguments and drama. It's human nature. It's unavoidable, but it was never anything serious. Just petty squabbles that got resolved and helped strengthen our bonds, which is all a very long and convoluted way of saying that we'd never been as divided as we were during our time up in that cabin. I watched Kelly try her best to comfort Michael for a while longer, but my mental acuity soon faltered again. More time passed without my notice, and when I came back to my senses once more, I checked my wristwatch. It was one of those fancy ones, the ones that also display what day of the week it is and the current date. I was taken aback to find out that it was Thursday, the 26th of December. Had 2 days really passed me by like that? Feeling parched, I decided to get up and grab a drink. We still had some beers, a bottle of wine, and half a bottle of whiskey left in the cooler, but I wasn't dumb. Even in my impaired state, I knew that too much alcohol would only dehydrate me faster, so I went for a beer and left the stronger stuff alone. I got one of the bottles out, undid the cap with much effort, and pressed my cracked lips against it. The liquid inside was on the verge of freezing as I tipped the bottle up, and it felt like thousands of sharp razor blades down my dry throat. But I don't think I've ever appreciated a drink more in my life. As soon as it started flowing, it was over and gone, so I discarded the bottle. Feeling a tiny bit better, I checked up on the others. They'd gone just as motionless as Michael, and I was worried that not all of them were alive anymore. "Guys?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Are you all still here?" Kelly cracked her bloodshot eyes open, and shot me a look of pure exhaustion. She probed Michael with her elbow, and he produced a few puffs of air out of his nose. Lori snuggled tighter against David, and he simply stated, "Where the hell else would we be?" That only left Jen. "Jen? Babe?" I called out, the words coming out as mere whispers. She tossed in her sleep, so I decided to let her be. But I wanted to get a closer look at Michael, who I knew was pretty banged up and whose wounds would only get exacerbated by the cold. I shuffled over to him and Kelly, seeing her eyes dilate with fear as I approached. She nearly hissed at me, scared like a cornered animal faced with a mighty predator. So I stopped a little distance away. Michael looked horrible. His face was purple and bulging, lips split open, and the bridge of his nose broken. The worst areas were covered in bandages and band-aids from the first aid kit. And the places where David's fist ruptured his flesh open were caked in dried blood and long since evaporated iodine that left a yellow tinge on his skin. His eyes were swollen shut, his hair fell out in clumps, and the remnants of his teeth that I could glean between his parted lips were jagged and sharp. He wouldn't last much longer. I was aware of that, and by the looks of her, neither would Kelly. I fetched 4 of the 5 remaining beers, tossing Kelly 2 of them and handing David the other 2. "Make Michael drink one as well," I told her, and went to lie back down next to Jen. She shuffled away from me when I got under the blanket, balling up against the wall. I wrapped myself around her as best as I could, but it felt like I was hugging a block of solid ice. Despite my stupor and the alcohol now racing through my veins, I had enough mental clarity to be surprised that we were all still alive. By all accounts, we should have all died by then, either to the cold or to suffocation as our oxygen slowly depleted. But we were all still hanging on, even if only by a thread. By now, you might be wondering how no one had found us yet. The answer is simple. Cell phones weren't as prolific back then, so it was normal to be out of touch with family and friends when he traveled. With 1 day's worth of driving to get here, a 2-day stay at the cabin, and another day to drive back home, no one would notice that something was amiss until Friday evening at the earliest, factoring in things such as delays because of potential traffic and possible detours. Our families were unlikely to sound the alarm earlier than Saturday morning, until word reached here from all the way back home, until a rescue unit would be scrambled together and sent to check on us, until they'd find a cabin buried under metric tons of snow. We could expect evac to happen around Saturday night at best, somewhat rehydrated and with the alcohol and the beer squeezing a bit more heat out of my muscles. I was lulled back to sleep. It was another fitful bout of rest, my mind half awake at any point throughout. I heard the others move around, pulling their covers, and I felt Jen squirm in my arms every so often. But by the time she got up, by the time she began moving around, I was too out of it to notice it. I woke up to the heavy smell of smoke burning my eyes and nostrils. When I got up, I found Jen knelt in front of the fireplace, struggling to ignite the wood inside of it by using a torn book and some matches. With the chimney blocked and nowhere for the fire to draw breath from, it bellowed waves of smoke back inside the cabin, cutting our already short oxygen supply even shorter. I bounded to my feet, my mind sent into overdrive as I fully realized what was happening. Without thinking, I went to the pile of snow and grabbed handfuls of it. I rushed to the fireplace, shoving Jan aside, and smothered the flames with the snow. "No!" she yelled in protest, springing to her feet and clawing at the back of my neck. I ignored her, focusing my efforts on embers. When I was sure that none of them survived my assault, I turned around to face her. "What the hell are you doing?" I said. She stopped her assault and pulled back a step, fearful of my justified outburst. "Were you trying to kill us all?" "I'm too cold," she said, and I could see the madness in her eyes. She wasn't thinking straight anymore. The stress of the hunger and the low temperatures pummeled her mind for too long and drove her into a delusional state. "Too cold. Too hungry," she murmured and collapsed into a heap on the floor. "We'll die. We're all going to die," she said, gripping the sides of her head in desperation. Hearing her blabbering, new life was breathed into Michael as well, though just barely. He began chanting in sync with her, proclaiming his hunger and our impending doom with slurred words. "Is everyone okay?" I asked, leaving Jen behind for a moment. I planned to get her back between the blankets, but I wanted to make sure that we weren't in danger of suffocating from the smoke before that. I'm fine, David told me when I got closer. We're both fine. Kelly, what about you and Michael? I asked her, but I was hesitant to approach her. She didn't say anything. Her eyes opened wide, big and shiny, peering right through me. One of her hands left the blanket, pointing finger jutted out, and she motioned for me to look behind. I didn't turn around in time. Something hit the back of my head, sending waves of pain up my scalp and down my spine. I fell to my hands and knees, disoriented, and heard David scream. Kelly and Lori joined him, their combined forces birthing a cacophony of yells that only exacerbated my headache. Before I got the chance to make sense of my situation, Michael kicked me in the ribs and sent me sprawling. I rolled on the floor from the force, stopping on my back, and managed to catch a glimpse of the room. Jen was on her feet, axe in one hand and a log of wood in the other. Michael had gotten up as well, scaring Kelly in the process, and he was now looming over me. "This whole shit show was your idea?" Jen accused, lobbing the wood at me and hitting my left shin. It exploded with more pain, but when I tried to reach for it and grab it, Michael kicked my hand away. For someone that was half dead, he all of a sudden had a lot more strength than he should have. "Your idea. Your fault," Jen said. She grabbed the axe tight with both hands and slowly walked over to me, stopping at my feet. "Jen," I said between clamped teeth. "Don't," she replied. You think that I don't know? That you're waiting for us to die." She trembled as she spoke, her head jolting from side to side, and her words sounded like those of a madman. The beast. It didn't show us the future. It showed us a way out. It taught us how to survive. Surviving. Michael echoed her words. David spoke up. He got to his feet while she stammered her nonsense and approached us with his hands in front of himself. "Calm down, please." Aiden didn't. "He knew," she said. "He knew, and he didn't tell us." Without warning, she lifted the axe up in the air. Its blade came down, so fast and vicious that it splintered the ceiling above when its tip connected. In a heartbeat, Michael dropped to his hunches and got a hold of my left leg with both hands. I tried to jerk it free, to dodge the blow, but his strength was superhuman. And then, in a fraction of a second, the axe made contact. It passed cleanly through flesh and bone and sinew, stopping in the floor below. I let out guttural screams, so loud and frightened that they threatened to tear my vocal cords to shreds. Blood shot out of my amputated leg, squirting and staining the floor as it spread a coppery smell in the air. "Another one," Michael said, but Jen ignored him. She grabbed my severed foot, quickly taking off the boot and sock as she scampered away. Even through the pain and suffering, I heard the crunch of her teeth as she bit down into it, pulling flesh and veins and bones away, greedily swallowing without even chewing. "You bitch," Michael said, infuriated. David tackled him from behind, sending him flying face first out of the floor. And through all of that, I was still screaming, holding on to my severed leg with all my might. David undid his belt with shaking hands and wide eyes, looping it around the stump as many times as he could. He wanted to make a tourniquet, which was smart, but he didn't get to finish. Michael jumped him, and the two of them flew away in a flurry of blind punches and kicks. I grabbed a hold of the belt, and with my last ounces of strength, I completed the tourniquet and tightened it as much as possible. The blood flow slowed, but it was far from stopping, and I knew I needed to act fast. David and Michael were still duking it out, their attention focused on each other, but Jen was nearly halfway through my foot, and I feared she'd be coming for seconds at any moment. Cauterize, I thought. Only chance. I turned on my belly and crawled towards the fireplace, one agonizing pull after another. The blood trail extended behind me, slicking my pants and robbing me of what little warmth I had left. When I reached the torn book and the matches, I quickly bundled it around the wound. Striking a match with how wild I was shaking was a nightmare, and my bloodied hands dampening the wood only made it harder. The first match broke, the second as well, but the third was the charm. It ignited, and I pressed it against the paper. It burst into flames and singed my flesh, spreading the disgusting smell of burning skin and hair in the air. I nearly gagged, gritting my teeth so hard that I feared they would splinter. I wanted to scream out, to curse and fight and just die. Anything would have been better, but I got through it, ripping pages in bulk from the other books and adding more paper to the fire as it burned away. And when the deed was finally done, when I ran out of paper and strength to keep going, I propped myself against the fireplace. David and Michael were still going at it, with no clear victor to their brawl. Jen finished eating my foot, tossing away the head of the tibia and rubbing the blood from her lips. By the look in her eyes as she gazed back at me, I knew she wasn't yet satisfied. She dropped down on all fours like a wild predator and bounded towards me. To my surprise, Kelly and Lori came to my defense, intercepting Jen and standing between her and me. "Jen, please," Lori said, raising her arms in defense. "Stop." But Jen didn't answer. Her manic eyes darted between the two, and she let out a growl. With moves so fast that I could barely see them, she lunged at Lori and pushed her aside. Lori crashed to the floor, hitting her head hard against the wood, and she began convulsing. Kelly tried to dash away, but Jen jabbed her hand into her throat, fitting her windpipe with her bare fingers. To this day, the sounds that Kelly made as she choked on her own blood are the worst sounds I've ever heard. She tried to suck air in, and when her gushing blood invaded her lungs, she tried to heave it back out. Her death wasn't fast, and it was anything but painless. Jen simply watched her drop to the floor, reaching for her own windpipe in a last desperate attempt to cling onto life. She didn't even wait for Kelly to die, just grabbed her foot and pulled her away into the bedroom. I got one last look at Kelly before the door swung shut, and the terror in her eyes pierced my soul. She was still conscious through all of it, and to this day I shudder at the thought that she was also mostly conscious through what followed. With the door closed behind him, Jen feasted on Kelly. I heard the sound of skin and flesh being ripped apart, of bones dislocating and breaking, and the gnashing of her hungry teeth as she took bite after bite. My attention was dragged back onto David and Michael when they landed only feet in front of me. I saw them struggle against each other, tossing and turning as they both tried to get the upper hand. Michael got his feet beneath himself and pushed, throwing David off and jumping him again. He pinned David's hands to the floor and headbutted him once, then twice, then a third time, and I saw his forehead coming away, stained with blood. David's nose was crooked and leaking, so badly broken that it rested on his cheek. Michael tried to bite down on David's face, but he dodged the attempt. Another one came, this one connecting with David's chin, and Michael pulled away a chunk of skin and flesh that he chewed on. Barely able to move, I realized that David wouldn't survive without help. Whatever possessed Jen and Michael imbued them with superhuman strength, and they became too much to handle. I forced my way on all fours, or, well, all threes, and limped over to the axe behind me. I heard Michael take another successful bite out of David's face, which spurred me on to move faster. Grabbing the axe and pushing to my feet, I used it as a crutch to walk over. Preoccupied with David, Michael failed to notice me. I raised the axe high up, steadying myself on one leg, and I brought it down with all my might. I swung it so hard that it whisked me off my foot, but it hit Michael right in the crown of his head. He jumped as if struck by lightning, spazzing out with the axe still impaled into his skull. He stopped after a few moments, wheezing as he drew his final breath. I toppled next to David, feeling my muscles burning from the effort, wanting nothing more than to pass out from the pain. But hearing Jen ravage Kelly's body in the bedroom, I knew I couldn't do that just yet. "David?" I asked quietly. "Yeah," he answered. "Still here. Can you move?" "More or less," he said, slowly getting to his feet. Barricading the bedroom door before Jen comes back, I asked him, which I knew was inconsiderate of me, but short one foot, I couldn't do it myself. "Why?" David asked. He got next to Lori and knelt in front of her, gently checking her pulse. "What's the point anymore?" "Come on," I urged. "Don't go suicidal on me, please. We can still make it out alive." David turned to look at me, and as his face came into view, I couldn't help but gasp. 3 chunks were missing from his face where Michael managed to bite him, one from his chin, the skin and flesh gone to reveal the bone beneath, another one from his cheek, leaving a hole big enough to expose his molars, and the final one from above his left eye, making him unable to close it anymore. He was probably in quite a bit of pain, but if he was, he didn't show it. If you say so, he said, though I could tell he didn't believe me. His spirit was crushed. He was already defeated. Still, he got to work moving the few pieces of furniture in the room to block the bedroom door. He limped and struggled against them in an effort that was nothing short of titanic in his condition in a few minutes. Even the fireplace had been dragged along the floor, aided by the slick blood that pooled pretty much everywhere. After he made sure that the pieces were stacked properly and wouldn't fall, he hoisted Lori in his arms and got back in their own corner, holding her tight against his chest. I, too, crawled back to my own corner, though I didn't feel the need to hide under the blankets, either because of the shock or the effort or the beast relinquishing its influence over us. I didn't feel as cold anymore. I watched David close his eyes, whispering reassuring words into Lori's ear, and lost myself to the fatigue and blood loss. In my near unconscious state, I heard Jen try to open the door, giving up when she couldn't. I heard her scratch and heave and yelp for a while, until even those sounds faded away. Before I succumbed entirely, I heard one final scream, a pale imitation of the beast's call that wasn't any less frightening when I came to again. After an untold amount of time, I couldn't even open my eyes anymore. It felt as if every last ounce of strength in my body was being used up on the simple act of breathing. Voices resounded from the bedroom, 4 in number and easy to distinguish from one another. "Hello?" One of them called out. "Anyone alive in there?" They attempted to open the door, but failed against the barricade. I heard shuffling and groaning, but soon they gave up. Out of the way, another voice said, before loud bangs claimed the relative silence. I managed to crack open one eye, barely enough to see in the dark. Part of the door splintered and broke as the men on the other side assaulted it with axes. Hands reached in through the resulting holes, pushing away the furniture that toppled to the floor. Between the gaps, light shined into the room from the other side, bright and blinding to my eye. The door opened after a few minutes, and I saw a figure enter the room. "My God," the man uttered. "It's a bloodbath. Help me." I croaked out. "Someone's still alive," he yelled to the others, and they rushed into the room. 2 of them knelt by my side, and the other 2 went straight to David and Lori. They checked up on me, gave my leg a proper tourniquet, and then they hoisted me out of the room. I got one final look at David, seeing that he'd slit his own throat and died while I was unconscious, his arms still wrapped around Lori. The mountain rescuers brought me into the bedroom, where I also saw the state of Kelly's body. She'd been so thoroughly mutilated that she was completely unrecognizable. Her face was a bloody mess of bare bone, her clothes had been torn to shreds, and her chest and abdomen were picked clean of flesh, ribs protruding from the carcass. But I was too drained to cry, too drained to even care. The rescuers tied me to a stretcher and got me out through a tunnel that had been dug out, leading from the window to the surface. A tunnel of blood-stained snow, one dug by Jen as she escaped, for she was the only one of us missing from the buried cabin. I was officially out by Friday evening, and after a helicopter ride to the nearest hospital, I got medical care that same night. The next few months were a tough battle. My days riddled with sessions of physical therapy and countless court hearings, given that I was the sole survivor. Everyone's families came at me one after the other, trying to pin all of the murders on me in their misguided attempts to bring justice to the departed. David's case was the first to get thrown out since they found a suicide note in one of his pockets, and the wound was self-inflicted. Lori's death was declared an accident caused by acute brain hemorrhaging that resulted from her falling and hitting her head. Kelly's murder was pinned on Jen, who was still missing. The only murder to which I admitted was Michael's. But after the autopsy revealed David's flesh in his stomach, I was acquitted on grounds of self-defense and defending another. The disaster was deemed as a tragic case of cabin fever, and it quickly got swept under the rug, an effort helped by the fact that none of us wanted media attention. I couldn't even attend any of their funerals. Their families wouldn't let me. As ashamed as I am to admit it, I contemplated suicide on an almost daily basis, desperate to be free of the guilt and nightmares. But I could never go through with it. A few years later, when home computers and the internet began spreading to everyday consumers, I found a small forum built around accounts of the paranormal. I told my story there, asking if anyone knew what the beast could have been. Most users either called me a LARPer with comments such as "nice story, bro," or gave me the same answer that the court provided, blaming cabin fever. I was ready to give up my search for a resolution and accept their verdict until I received a PM from an anonymous user that only said 4 words. It was a Wendigo. Those 4 words spurred me into months of research. I read all the online resources I could find, and when they became insufficient and repetitive, I took to searching for books on the beast. When even the books failed me, I began traveling, seeking Native American shamans for their legends and first-hand experience. All of my guilt and hate and fear morphed, turning into determination, with my sole goal in life being that of slaying the beast that took everything from me. Armed with knowledge about what I faced, I began to prepare, decades spent on this single-minded objective. Which brings me to the Christmas Eve of 2020, the moment when all of my training and prepping culminated into my one and only attempt at fulfilling my life's goal. And yet, standing face to face with Jin's disfigured visage in that clearing, I began doubting my ability to finish what I had so eagerly started. Wendigos, mythical beasts originating in the Algonquin people's folklore, described by them as monsters and evil spirits, drawn to hunger, greed, and the cold. They can push people to acts of murder and cannibalism. As humanity's knowledge and experience with these beasts increased, we came to understand that they possessed many more abilities than that, whether manipulation, possession, and metamorphosis, just to name a few. But through all of that, through all of the variants and permutations of these spirits that humanity has conjured up, one fact has remained constant: their hunger. The same hunger that radiated from Jin's eyes as she faced me after 3 decades apart. She began circling me at a distance, observing me, plotting out her next move with care. I held my hand extended in her direction, my hope dying with every call of her name that went unanswered. "Jin, please," I pleaded, feeling the panic attack reach its peak. "It's me, babe. It's Aiden." Her beady eyes narrowed at the mention of my name, and she stopped pacing. I recognized that sweet taste. She garbled, extending a blackened tongue out of her mouth and licking her lips. "My sweet, sweet Aiden." Her mellow, angelic voice was but a shell, emptied of its warmth and filled back up with hatred. It sounded raspy and gruff, a far cry from the voice that used to soothe my heart. If Jin's essence was still trapped in the monster she become, I couldn't see any portion of it rising to the surface. Putting my free hand back around the shotgun, I doubled down on my goal of ending the existence of this miserable creature and freeing Jin's soul. She deserved no less. And my biggest regret was that it had taken me so long to bring myself to face her. In a flash of realization, she dropped down to all 4s and bounded towards me through the snow. Fighting back the panic attack, my labored breath hitching in my throat, I aimed a shotgun. The echoing shot claimed the silence of the night, pushing the stock into my shoulder. The smell of burnt gunpowder mixed in with the shock of the recoil helped set my mind back on track. The flurry of buckshot connected, hitting Jin's ribs as she tried to dodge it. Animalistic screams of pain left her throat, but she was undeterred. With renewed anger, she kept running towards me. I let out 2 more shots before she jumped me, but the bullets wouldn't pierce her tough skin with a final leap. She landed on top of me, and I toppled to the ground. My world reduced itself down to the smell of death and decay emanating from her, and to her claws and teeth desperately trying to dig into me. She viciously tore through my clothes, drawing blood that welled from my wounds and stained the both of us in our struggle. I tried to roll away, to break free and gain the upper hand, but her strength was much greater than mine. She kept me pinned down in the snow and lashed her jaws around my left shoulder. I felt the muscles and tendons get crushed under immense force, but her jaded teeth couldn't pierce the jacket. Letting go of her center mass that I failed to push away, I gripped and maneuvered the shotgun until its barrel rested against her exposed abdomen. I pulled the trigger, and the force of that shot made her let go. She jumped away, off of me, and on her feet, growling as she held her bleeding stomach. The point-blank shot managed to pierce and wound her, but I could see her flesh bubbling and weaving back together. In a matter of moments, the damage was as good as gone. My only chance was to ignite the fire and use the flames to my advantage, but I couldn't be hasty. The light and warmth of the blaze would have scared her away, forcing me to hunt her down or abandon the attempt, neither of which I wanted. She needed to be on the pyre. I walked back towards it, keeping the shotgun trained on her, letting out more shots whenever she got too close for comfort. When I finally got close enough, and while my feet snagged on the logs, I feigned surprise and pretended to topple backwards onto it. She took the bait, jumping me without hesitation. Her hands tore the zipper of my jacket, exposing the shirt beneath. Before she got a chance to dig into me, I struck the side of her head with the shotgun's butt and let out another shot in the small window of time when she was disoriented. The buckshot cleaved through the left side of her neck, almost disconnecting her shoulder. I grabbed her torso, hoisting her up. She screamed and struggled in my grasp, her rapid healing kicking in and giving me only moments to act. I tossed her onto the pyre as far up as I could manage, and I pulled the lighter out of my breast pocket. Her eyes widened as I struck it, but she didn't manage to run away. The lighter landed on the gasoline-soaked wood, igniting it as the flames spread rapidly upwards. It wasn't like in the movies. Let me make that clear. It was wood soaked in gasoline, not high-yield explosives going up in a blaze of glory, but the spread of the flames was still fast. All I needed to do was to make sure that Jin wouldn't escape before the fire consumed her. The flames reached Jin's feet, setting her off at a supernatural rate. The fire clung to her skin like napalm, engulfing her in a matter of moments. She tried to jump away to save herself, but I shot her back down. Weakened by the heat, her skin couldn't stop the buckshots anymore, and her left leg was blown away at the knee. She screamed and convulsed, cursing my name as the flames ate her little by little. You see, there's a reason why Wendigos prefer winter and the cold it brings. Warmth weakens or outright negates the natural armor that is their skin, and fire has the potential to kill them. I never needed to reload. By the time I shot the second shell, she could barely bring herself to stand. By the time I shot the third and final one, she was more bone than flesh. Her skin fell away in large chunks, exposing the muscles and organs beneath, to be charred into ashes that dispersed in a breeze. After a few minutes, as the fire reached its peak, Jin was nothing more than a blackened skeleton. Her form was dead, and I hoped that her spirit would finally go to rest. With my job done, I took a deep breath and let my muscles relax. I would need to stay awake throughout the rest of the night to make sure that the fire wouldn't spiral out of control, but the worst of it was over. Or so I thought, until I heard countless screams just like Jin's resounding from all around the mountainside. I hastily reloaded the shotgun as I turned to face the forest, and I found dozens of pairs of eyes peering at me from the cover of darkness. I was a fool to believe that Jin would be the only one to go in these mountains, but none dared approach the clearing, afraid of the fire raging in its center. Having seen me dispatch, Jin only drove home the point that they shouldn't be messing with me, so they kept to the shadow of the night. A few of them tried taunting me into action, repeating Jin's words in her voice and thrusting themselves into the light before quickly retreating. But I didn't budge. With midnight having just passed and 7 more hours until sunrise, I hoped I could prolong the fire's life enough to see the night's end. That hope was dashed the moment all the Wendigos fell silent. Looking up at the peak that loomed above us, my sight followed theirs, slow and afraid, because I knew what I'd find. The real beast, the Wendigo spirit in the flesh, was in the same spot I'd seen it all of those years ago. It let out a howl that put the others to shame, and it jumped with so much power that it turned into a black dot flashing across the moon's image in the sky, above the cabin, above our heads, over miles of forest, landing in the valley below with such force that it sounded like a stick of dynamite going off. I heard it let out another howl before barreling up the slope towards me. It sounded like 1,000 horses galloping at once, and it moved just as fast. Knowing that the normal buckshot wouldn't leave a dent in it, I reloaded the shotgun with silver slugs in the little time I had. As the last one slipped in and I pumped the shotgun, I saw a tree flying towards me through the air. I ran, dodging the slam of branches and the rain of pine cones. The tree fell on top of the pyre, scattering the burning logs into the snow around and killing the flames almost instantly as they melted the flakes into water that quickly evaporated, filling my surroundings with steam that condensed into a thin fog. The light died down to almost nothing. I turned to face the forest and saw the immense shadow of the true Wendigo loom over the canopy of the evergreens, dwarfing them in size. It stopped at the edge of the clearing, slowing down, but still advancing towards me, a show of its confidence, of its abilities, and of its certainty that I posed no threat to it. It towered over me in the cabin, 2 stories tall, without measuring the antlers on its head. Its center mass resembled a desecrated deer. Its hind legs were like that of a goat, and its forelimbs were wolf-like in nature, ending in paws with enormous claws. Its head was a deer's skull devoid of flesh, with leathery skin hanging off its sides, and mane of thick hair running down its spine. That was until it stood upright and began to morph. Its back straightened with sickening pops of dislocating bones, the hind legs shortened, and the paws slowly turned to hands before my eyes. It took on a smaller appearance, but not any less threatening or terrifying as it approached me. Seeing it in action, I finally understood what I was up against, and the severity of my predicament left me paralyzed in terror. Over years of research into the Wendigos myth, I came across many variants of this creature, each with their own description of its appearance and abilities. In my pursuit of the truth, I mostly ignored the accounts of the settlers, which were much more outlandish, and focused on those of the native people, the people I believe had the most experience with a Wendigo, the people I believe didn't blow the beast out of proportion. And I'd been wrong, as every story tends to have a seed of truth to it. The beast I was now facing, this force of nature, it was the real Wendigo, a spirit of the land, and the humans imbued with its power and twisted by its madness were nothing more than pale imitations, possessed puppets for it to commandeer as it pleased. The most outlandish claim about it came to mind, the fact that the Wendigo grows bigger and stronger the more people it consumes. And seeing its true size for myself, seeing all the possessed that surrounded us, I now knew that to be true. I trained a shotgun on it, ready to shoot in a moment's notice, and began walking sideways back towards the pyre. Not to reignite it, but to get the axe so that I might stand some chance. From the look in its eyes, I knew that it had me figured out, and yet it allowed me to retrieve the axe. Another show of confidence, I realized, as if it wanted to say that the silver-coated toothpick would do nothing to help me. It let out a huff of air through its nose and began moving again, closing in for the kill. With the axe at hand, I struck the other gasoline canister, piercing it and sending it flying. It landed on the dying embers as I dashed away, and this time there was a bang. Still not a Hollywood-style bang, but a bang strong enough to reignite the fire and send flaming shards of the canister flying. Wendigo took a step back, giving me enough time to put my plan into action. I ran for the sleigh, picking it up and holding it against my chest, turning back around towards the slope. I ran by the beast, shooting 2 shells at it as I passed. The slugs impacted its body, creating fist-sized holes in its flesh and making it burn from the contact with the holy metal. It let out angry howls, but I didn't stop or turn around. I jumped to my belly, landing on the sleigh and pushing myself downhill. I quickly picked up speed through the fresh snow, but it wasn't exactly a well-used skiing track. I only go so fast, and it wasn't fast enough. Behind me, the Wendigo dropped back down on all fours and gave chase, with its puppets following closely behind. I maneuvered into a thicker part of the forest, weaving the sleigh between trees in an attempt to make it slow down, but it was agile for its size, easily copying my moves and gaining on me fast. The few trees it couldn't dodge, it simply head-butted, uprooting them and sending them flying down the slope. Halfway down, with the incline beginning to falter, it caught up to me. I raised the shotgun with one hand and fired again, but it braved the slug without slowing down. Its antlers pointed my way, and it tried to shove them beneath the sleigh to append me, but I switched to the axe. The moment it got close enough, I struck the blade in its neck with all the strength I could muster. It was embedded in the Wendigo's flesh, but I couldn't push it deep enough. As it thrashed around, the handle got torn out of my grip. A new sound appeared in the distance, barely audible at first, but growing in intensity until I could make it out over the gusts of wind and the Wendigo's loud steps. The sound of an engine of some kind. Turning my head around for a split second, I saw a headlight some 300 feet away and gaining on us fast. In a matter of moments, a snowmobile driving recklessly was on Wendigo's heels, and I got a look at the driver, Rachel. She pulled out a gun of her own as she neared the Wendigo, a small pistol that I couldn't make out, and she let a few shots fly at the beast. The bullets bounced off, only angering the monster. It swatted a paw at her, catching the snowmobile's front and sending it flying. I saw Rachel land in the deep snow, and then the Wendigo approached me one final time, and seeing that I was out of slugs, charged me. Its antlers caught the sleigh on my right side, sending me crashing into the first tree in my wake. The muscles along my back got crushed from the force, sending pain up and down my body. The beast slowed down, one of its paws morphing into a hand again, and it used the hand to pull the axe out of its own neck and cast it aside. Black, putrid blood flowed from the wound, unable to heal the damage done by the silver. It stained the beast's mane and chest, and it approached me slowly as I turned on my back. I knew I was done for, but surprisingly enough, I didn't feel scared. Do your worst, I told it, and what I was sure would be the final show of defiance on my part. I already got what I wanted, I said. The Wendigo slowed. Its eyes like burning embers made contact with mine, and it narrowed them. The possessed caught up to us, forming a rough circle around me, their attention completely focused on what would follow. Peering deep into my soul, the Wendigo showed me the fate it had in store for me. I saw myself in a state similar to Jen's, haunting the mountains during the countless eons to come. Never sated, never warm, never at rest, my soul slowly got corrupted as it fueled the Wendigo's magic. Damned for all of eternity, with no one to come and set me free like I'd done for Jen. The Wendigo bit down on me and pulled back, ready to take me off into the woods with it. But my prosthetic foot came loose. It stumbled backwards under its own force, surprise thick in its eyes, as it held a mere piece of plastic and metal in its mouth, not the flesh it was expecting. I was in such a state of shock, my mind so strained by the stress and fear, that I couldn't help but laugh at it. Loud, crazed laughter, echoing through the forest as the Wendigo simply watched, not knowing what to make of the situation. As my laughter picked up, it abandoned the attempt to make heads or tails of what happened. Its jaws opened, letting the prosthetic fall into the snow, and I saw all of its muscles tense up. As it pounced on me again, I retreated away from it on my elbows, and it lifted its head high up, ready to bite down on my midsection. Another yell, one I'd never heard before, freeze time and place. A shining streak of metal swung from behind the Wendigo, hitting it in the neck and stopping in its flesh. The beast let out an ear-piercing scream, but I didn't allow it a moment of reprieve. I kicked at the axe's head from below it, driving it deeper into its neck as I felt the bone of my leg crack. I kicked again, and again, and again, the Wendigo jolting from each hit, unable to run away. It tried to skitter away, but it fell on its side, bleeding profusely onto the clean snow. The shadow of my savior moved, looming over the Wendigo, and she grabbed a hold of the axe's handle. With all of her might, she pulled it free before swinging again. I saw the Wendigo's body convulse with each chop, until the blade made it all the way through its throat and separated its head from its body and all throughout it. Rachel kept screaming, scared out of her mind. "What the hell?" she asked, collapsing to her knees. I slowly crawled next to her under the attentive gazes of the possessed. With their master weakened, they didn't dare approach here, I told Rachel, who was drenched in blood from head to toe and trembling with fear and adrenaline. "Give me the axe." Her hands relinquished the handle, and I took it from her. Even decapitated as it was, the Wendigo wasn't dead yet, and only the axe's silver-coated blade could pierce it. I swung at its chest, hearing its ribs crunch and break as I pulled the pelt and flesh away. The whole ordeal felt liberating and cathartic, consuming the decades of pent-up hate and regret in me. By the time the Wendigo's chest was spread open, revealing its icy heart, I couldn't even bring myself to despise it anymore. I was spent. I brought the axe's blade down on it one final time, cleaving its heart in two. Darkness rushed out of it, spreading through the forest like a shock wave. As it reached the possessed, it set their souls free of the beast's influence. Their bodies crumbled to dust in an instant as decades or centuries of decay came rushing back, no longer held at bay by Wendigo's magic. I collapsed into the snow, breathing heavily but thoroughly satisfied with myself. "Roger," Rachel said, jumping next to me and shaking my chest. "I'm fine," I stuttered. "Give me a feel." "I'll be right as rain." Her eyes went wide as she saw my grin, and she punched my chest weakly. I saw the fire from all the way back home, and I got worried. "I jumped on the snowmobile to come check on you." The cabin was empty, and I looked down a slope, and there was a big tree flying, and I heard that damn thing scream. "I thought you died." In my defense, I nearly did. I said, "Where's your family?" Are they safe? What the hell was that thing? There's no family, I answered. Never was. I don't have any. No sons, no grandkids. Nothing. I came here alone to kill that thing. I'm sorry I lied to you. She grabbed my hand and helped me into a sitting position, our faces inches from each other. She draped one of her arms around my neck, closing her eyes and leaning in, but I stopped her. I'm not done yet, I said, and I pushed past her. I crawled towards my discarded prosthetic and shook the snow off of it. The plastic was cracked, the metal beneath was bent, and there were clear teeth marks on its surface, but it didn't matter. I put it back on and got up, helping Rachel to her feet as well. We have to burn the body and get the heart into the silver box I left back at the cabin before the Wendigo reforms, I explained, walking over to my sleigh. I picked it up out of the snow, finding it had survived the assault unscathed, so I took it next to the body. I don't know about you, but I don't want to fight that thing again. Explanations can wait. How can I help? Rachel asked. Go check on the snowmobile, see if it works. If not, we'll have to make another fire here. She did as I asked, trudging through the snow towards her wrecked vehicle. A few minutes later, I was done hoisting the Wendigo onto the sleigh and tying it down. The sound of the snowmobile's engine starting up reached me all the way down there, making me let out a sigh of relief. Rachel returned. We tied the sleigh behind the snowmobile, and we carried Wendigo's corpse back up to the cabin. The fire still raged on, and I pushed the body into it, sleigh and all. Just like Jen had done earlier, it erupted into flames, turning into ash in mere moments and scattering in the wind. I locked the heart into a silver box, which I planned to deliver to a shaman who could properly kill the beast, and I sat Rachel down in front of the fire. I told her the entire story of my life up to that point, just as I have told it to all of you. She listened with bated breath, but I kept going, digging out the memories and laying them bare. For the first time in my life, someone was not only willing to listen to my story, but they also believed me. I needed to release it. I needed to vent, and I felt all of the pent-up emotions leave me bit by bit with each word I spoke. When I was done, we stood in silence for a while, neither of us knowing what to say anymore. Sunrise came, and we rode off into it on Rachel's snowmobile. She dropped me off at my truck, but we couldn't part ways. I guess I should be going, I said, unusually fidgety. I have to deliver this to a shaman. Yeah, I guess you should, Rachel said. She had her arms around herself, rubbing her own shoulders for warmth with a defeated look. She turned on the spot and began walking towards the snowmobile. I had my own hand on the truck's handle, while my heart fought my mind in one. Hoping I wouldn't regret this decision, I took off after her, catching her arm and turning her around. Then we kissed. Now, I know you probably expect something awesome. That we went on to become a bombastic duo of monster hunters or something of that sort. But we didn't. I left to deliver the Wendigo's heart and hung my rhetorical cape away, ready to close that chapter of my life. But we are dating. In fact, she's with me right now, reading every word that I've written. She says hi to you all, and I bid you farewell.